What does it mean to walk in darkness, yet trust in a light unseen? In the deep places of the world where stone breathes ancient sorrow and the air grows heavy with forgotten names, there lies a question older than the mountains. What is it that calls us forward when all paths seem to end? In the tales of Middle-earth, woven by the heart and hand of J.R.R. Tolkien, we find not answers, but echoes of a truth that stirs in the soul like a half-remembered song. This is no mere story of heroes and rings of battles won or lost. It is a pilgrimage through the shadows of the human spirit, a journey where fear and hope entwine, where burdens are borne not for glory, but for love. And so we begin, not at the fires of Mount Doom, nor in the golden woods of Lothlorien, but in the cold, silent halls of Moria, where a wizard stood alone and saw a light no darkness could devour. In the depths of Khazad-dûm, where the dwarves once sang their stone-carving songs, there is a silence that is not empty. It is a silence that listens, that weighs the heart, that knows the tread of every foot that dares its halls. Gandalf the Grey, Mithrandir, the wanderer of many names, stepped into that silence with a staff of gnarled wood and a heart that carried the memory of stars. He was no stranger to darkness. Long had he walked the paths of Middle-earth bearing the weight of a purpose older than the hills. Yet in Moria, that purpose seemed to flicker like a candle caught in a sudden draught. The Fellowship of the Ring. Those 9 souls bound by fate followed him into the mines, their steps uncertain, their breaths sharp with the chill of the unknown. Frodo the ring-bearer felt the one ring grow heavy at his neck, its whispers curling like smoke in his mind. Aragorn, son of Arathorn, gripped the hilt of Andúril, his eyes searching the shadows for threats he could not name. And young Pippin Took of the Shire felt the weight of his own curiosity, a spark that would soon ignite a peril none could foresee. Why Moria? Why this path? This forsaken road through the bones of a kingdom lost? Gandalf did not choose it lightly. The way through the mountains was barred by snow and storm, and the Gap of Rohan whispered of Saruman's betrayal. Moria was not a choice, but a necessity. A test. For in the tales of Middle-earth, the hardest paths are not those of stone and steel, but of the soul. To enter Moria is to enter the self, to face the shadows that dwell within fear, doubt the temptation to turn back. Gandalf knew this, as he knew the names of every star in the sky. He knew, too, that the light he sought was not one of flame or crystal, but of something deeper, something that could not be held or seen, yet could never be extinguished. The halls of Moria are vast, their pillars carved with the pride of Durin's folk, their ceilings lost in shadow. But pride, as Tolkien teaches us, is a fragile thing. The dwarves delved too deep their hammers, waking a terror that slept in the roots of the earth. Balin, son of Fundin, came to reclaim the glory of his kin, and found only silence. His tomb, a slab of stone in the chamber of Mazabul, stands as a warning. Not all that is sought can be claimed, not all that is lost can be restored. Frodo saw the Book of Records, its pages stained with blood and ink, and felt the weight of history press upon him. We cannot get out the final words, read a cry that lingered in the air like a ghost. Yet Gandalf did not linger. We must go on, he said, his voice steady, though his eyes held a grief older than the mountains. To go on. What does it mean to go on when the way is dark and the heart is heavy? This is the first question of our journey, the question that binds us to the fellowship to Tolkien's world, to the eternal struggle of the human spirit. It is not a question of courage, though courage is needed. It is not a question of strength, though strength will falter. It is a question of faith not in gods or kings, but in the unseen, in the possibility of a light that endures beyond the shadow. Gandalf bore this faith, though he did not speak it. He bore it in his silence, in the way his staff tapped the stone, in the way his eyes searched the darkness, not for danger, but for hope. The fellowship moved deeper, their footsteps echoing in the vastness. The air grew colder, the shadows thicker. Frodo felt the ring's weight grow, its voice sharper now, promising safety, power, escape. "You need not bear this alone," it seemed to whisper. "You need not walk this path. Temptation is no stranger to Middle-earth nor to us. It is the shadow that follows every step, the voice that offers ease when the road grows hard." Frodo's burden was not the ring alone, but the choice it forced upon him to carry it or to yield. Tolkien knew this truth, for he wove it into every tale. The ring is not merely gold, nor Sauron merely evil. They are mirrors reflecting the desires of the heart, the fears that gnaw at the soul. To bear the ring is to bear the self, to face the temptation to abandon the path, to seek power over pain, control over chaos. Yet Frodo walked on his small feet steady, though his heart trembled. Beside him, Samwise Gamgee carried no ring, but bore a burden no less heavy, love. Sam's eyes, bright with the simplicity of the Shire, saw not the grandeur of Moria's halls, but the weariness in Frodo's face. He did not speak of it, for Sam was not one for grand words. But his presence was a light, a quiet flame that warmed the darkness. Tolkien gives us Sam not as a hero, but as a truth that love unadorned and steadfast is the strength that carries us when all else fails. In Moria, where the air is thick with loss, Sam's loyalty is a song soft but unbroken, a melody that lingers in the heart. The path led them to a crossroads, 3 tunnels branching into the dark. Gandalf paused, his brow furrowed, his memory clouded. "I have no memory of this place," he said, and in those words we hear the weight of his years, the burden of a mind that has seen too much carried too long. Gandalf is no god, no infallible sage. He is a wanderer, a servant of the secret fire, and like all who serve, he knows doubt. To stand at the crossroads to choose when no choice is clear is to stand at the edge of the self. Moria tests not only the body, but the spirit, stripping away certainty, leaving only the raw truth of who we are. Gandalf sat his staff across his knees and waited. He did not force the choice, did not demand the path reveal itself. He listened as the silence of Moria listened, and in that listening he sought the light. What is the light Gandalf sought? Not the glow of his staff, nor the flicker of a torch. It is the light of purpose, of meaning, of the unseen truth that binds the world. In Tolkien's myth, light is not merely illumination, but revelation. It is the star glass of Galadriel, the Silmarils of Feanor, the flame of Anor that Gandalf wields. It is hope not as a fleeting wish, but as a force eternal and unyielding. In Moria, where the stars are hidden, Gandalf's faith in this light is his guide. He does not see it, but he knows it as the sailor knows the pole star, though clouds obscure the sky. And so he waits not in despair, but in trust, until the path becomes clear. The fellowship rested, their voices hushed, their hearts uneasy. Pippin, restless, tossed a stone into a well, and the silence shattered. A faint tap, then another echoed from the depths like the heartbeat of the mountain. Gandalf's eyes flashed with anger, but also fear. "Fool of a Took," he muttered, but his voice held no malice, only the weight of knowledge. For Gandalf knew what stirred in Moria's depths, what watched from the shadows. The Balrog, Durin's bane. A demon of fire and shadow was no mere beast, but a remnant of an older world, a terror born of Morgoth's malice. Its presence was a reminder the past is never truly gone. It lingers in the stones, in the heart, in the choices we make. Pippin's stone was not the cause of their peril, but a spark that woke it, as our own small choices often wake the consequences we fear. They moved on faster now, the air thick with foreboding. The tunnels narrowed, the walls closing in, as if the mountain itself sought to crush them. Frodo's hand strayed to the ring, its weight a constant pull, its voice a constant lure. Aragorn's stride was steady, but his eyes darted to the shadows, his hand never far from his sword. Legolas the elf moved with a grace that belied his unease, his senses sharp, his heart heavy with the memory of ancient sorrows. Gimli, son of Gloin, spoke little, but his eyes lingered on the carvings of his kin, his heart torn between pride and grief. The fellowship was no army, no band of heroes bound by strength, They were a fragile thread woven of trust and necessity, each carrying their own burdens, their own shadows. And Gandalf. He walked at the fore, his staff, a beacon, his heart, a storm. He knew the Balrog waited, though he did not speak it. He knew too that Moria was more than a path, more than a test. It was a crucible, a place where the soul is forged or broken. Tolkien does not give us Moria as a mere setting, but as a symbol, a mirror of the inner dark we all must face. To walk its halls is to walk the edge of despair, to feel the weight of the world, to hear the whispers of doubt and temptation. Yet it is also to seek the light, to trust in the unseen, to carry on when all seems lost. Gandalf bore this truth, as he bore the staff, as he bore the hope of the fellowship. He did not falter, though the shadow grew. They came at last to the bridge of Khazad-dûm, a slender span over a chasm of unfathomable depth. The air was hot now, the silence broken by the distant roar of fire. The Balrog was near its presence, a weight that pressed upon the heart. Gandalf turned his face stern, his eyes alight with a fire of their own. "You cannot pass," he said, and in those words we hear not defiance but destiny. He stood alone, the fellowship behind him, the abyss before him. The Balrog rose a storm of flame and shadow, its whip cracking like thunder. Frodo cried out, his voice lost in the roar. Aragorn drew his sword, but Gandalf's hand stayed him. This was no battle for steel, but for spirit, for the light that endures. What light did Gandalf see in that moment as the Balrog's fire consumed the bridge? Was it the flame of Anor, the secret fire he served? Was it the memory of the stars, the song of creation, the hope of a world redeemed? Tolkien does not tell us, for some truths cannot be spoken, only felt. Gandalf fell, his staff broken, his body swallowed by the dark. Yet in his fall he was not defeated. He fought not for victory, but for the fellowship, for the hope they carried, for the light that could not be extinguished. His cry, "Fly, you fools," was no command, but a gift, a final act of love that set them free. And so we pause here at the edge of the abyss, our hearts heavy with Gandalf's fall, our minds alight with the question, what light did he see? This is not the end, but a beginning, a step into the deeper dark, where fear and hope entwine, where the soul is tested, where the unseen light calls us forward. The fellowship will go on, as we must, go on bearing their burdens, seeking their truths. Frodo will carry the ring. Sam his love, Aragorn his legacy, each a thread in the tapestry of Tolkien's myth. And we too will walk with them through the shadows toward the light, trusting in a hope we cannot see, but know. For in the tales of Middle-earth, as in the tales of our own hearts, the darkness is never the end. It is the crucible, the silence, the question that shapes us. And the light. The light is the answer not given but sought, not found but trusted. So let us go on into the depths where the stars are hidden but never lost. The chasm of Khazad-dûm swallowed Gandalf's cry, and the fellowship fled, their hearts torn by grief, their steps faltering on the ancient stone. The bridge of Khazad-dûm, that slender thread over the abyss, was behind them now, but its shadow lingered, a wound that bled in silence. The air of Moria was no longer merely cold. It was a weight, a presence that pressed upon the soul, as if the mountain itself mourned the wizard's fall. Frodo Baggins. The ring-bearer felt the one ring pulse at his chest, its whispers sharper now, feeding on his sorrow, promising solace where none could be found. Aragorn, son of Arathorn, led them onward, his face a mask of resolve, though his eyes betrayed the storm within. Samwise Gamgee, ever faithful, stayed close to Frodo, his hand hovering near his master's shoulder, as if touch alone could anchor him against the tide of despair. The others, Legolas, Gimli, Boromir, Merry and Pippin, followed their silence louder than any cry, each bearing a fragment of the loss that now defined them. What does it mean to lose the guide, to stand in darkness with no star to mark the way? In the tales of Middle-earth woven by J.R.R. Tolkien's hand loss is not a moment but a journey. It is the ache that shapes the heart, the silence that teaches the soul to listen. Gandalf's fall was no mere event, no simple turning of the tale. It was a severance, a breaking of the thread that bound the fellowship to hope, to certainty, to the illusion that the path could be walked without cost. Yet in that breaking there lies a deeper truth, one that Tolkien whispers through the stone and shadow of Moria. The light we seek is not given, but found not in the presence of the guide, but in the courage to walk without him. The fellowship emerged from the mines into the dim light of day, the mountains of Dimrill Dale rising like sentinels around them. The sun, pale and distant, offered no warmth, only a stark reminder of the world they had left behind. Frodo stood upon the rocky slope, his eyes fixed on the horizon, but his heart still in the abyss. The ring was heavier now, its voice no longer a whisper, but a pulse, a rhythm that matched the beat of his fear. "He is gone," Frodo thought, and the words were a stone in his chest, unyielding, unmovable. Gandalf had been more than a leader. He had been a light, a certainty in a world that offered none. Without him, the ring seemed to grow its power, swelling in the void left by the wizard's fall. Temptation curled around Frodo's thoughts, soft as a lover's voice. You could end this. You could wield me. You could be free. But Sam was there, his presence a quiet rebuke to the ring's lies. Sam did not speak, not yet, for he knew the weight of words in a heart so burdened. Instead, he knelt beside Frodo, unpacking a small bundle of food, his hands steady, his movements deliberate. Bread from the Shire, simple and plain, lay between them, and in that act, unseen, uncelebrated Tolkien offers us a sacrament. Sam's love is not a grand gesture, but a daily choice, a refusal to let despair claim what he holds dear. In the shadow of Moria, where the air is thick with loss, Sam's bread is a light not of flame or star, but of the ordinary, the enduring, the true. Frodo ate, though the taste was ash, and in that eating he chose to go on, not for hope, but for Sam. Aragorn's voice broke the silence sharp with urgency. "We cannot linger," he said, his eyes scanning the peaks, his hand on Anduril's hilt. The loss of Gandalf had made him leader, though he did not seek the role. Aragorn, heir of Isildur, bore a legacy as heavy as Frodo's ring, a crown he did not claim, a past he could not escape. In Moria, he had fought to protect, to follow, but now he must guide, and the weight of that choice pressed upon him. Tolkien gives us Aragorn not as a king, but as a man, one who knows the cost of failure, who feels the eyes of the fellowship upon him, who hears the whispers of doubt in his own heart. To lead is to carry not only the path, but the souls who follow, and Aragorn's steps were heavy with that truth. They moved toward Lothlorien, the Golden Wood, though its name was yet unknown to them. The path was uncertain, the land wild and unwelcoming. Legolas the elf walked with a grace that seemed to defy the earth's pull, his eyes distant, as if he saw not the rocks and thorns, but the memory of a world unmarred. "There is a light ahead," he said softly, his voice a melody that stirred the air. Legolas spoke not of hope, but of memory of the ancient beauty of the elves, of a time when the stars sang and the trees listened. Yet even he, immortal and unyielding, felt the shadow of Moria, the loss of Gandalf, the fragility of their purpose. Tolkien's elves are not untouched by sorrow. They are its keepers, bearing the weight of ages, their light tempered by the knowledge that all things fade. Gimli, son of Gloin, walked with a heavier tread, his axe at his side, his heart torn by the ruin of Khazad-dûm. Moria was his heritage, the pride of his people, and its fall was a wound that bled anew. "Balin is dead," he said, his voice low, as if the words were too heavy to speak aloud. Gimli's grief was not only for his kin, but for the dream of restoration, the hope that what was lost could be reclaimed. Tolkien weaves this truth into the dwarf's tale. The past is a fire that warms and burns, a light that guides and blinds. Gimli's steps were steady, but his heart wandered the halls of Moria, seeking a glory that could never be. Boromir, man of Gondor, bore a different burden. His eyes were fixed on Frodo on the ring, though he did not speak it. Gandalf's fall had shaken him not only as a loss, but as a warning. Boromir was a warrior, a son of a steward, a man who carried the weight of a city crumbling under shadow. The ring was no mere burden to him, but a solution, a power that could save his people, could end the war that gnawed at his heart. "Why must we wander in the wild?" he asked, his voice sharp, though he tried to soften it. "Gondor bleeds, and we chase shadows. Tolkien gives us Boromir, not as a villain, but as a mirror reflecting the temptation we all face to seize control, to trade hope for certainty, to choose power over trust. Boromir's struggle is not with the ring, but with himself, and in his eyes we see the flicker of a choice yet unmade." Merry and Pippin, hobbits of the Shire, walked together, their steps lighter than the others, though their hearts were not. Pippin's face was pale, his eyes haunted by the memory of the well, the stone, the terror that followed. "I didn't mean it," he whispered to Merry, and the words were a plea, a prayer for absolution. Merry, ever the elder, took his hand, his voice steady. None could have known Pip. Tolkien's hobbits are not heroes, but hearts, small and resilient, bearing the weight of their own choices. Pippin's stone was no mere mistake, but a symbol of the truth that our smallest acts ripple, that our errors shape the world as surely as our triumphs. Yet Merry's hand, clasped tight, is a reminder we are not defined by our failures, but by the love that carries us through them. The fellowship reached the eaves of Lothlorien, where the trees grew tall and golden, their leaves whispering secrets older than the sun. The air was different here, lighter, yet heavy with a presence that watched, that judged. Haldir, an elf of the Galadrim, met them, his bow drawn, his eyes sharp with suspicion. "The world is changed," he said, his voice a song of sorrow. "No stranger may pass without the lady's will." Aragorn stepped forward, his voice calm, though his heart was weary. "We seek refuge, not conquest," he said, and in those words we hear the humility of a king who does not claim his throne. Tolkien's Lothlorien is not merely a haven, but a mirror, reflecting the heart of those who enter. To stand before its trees is to stand before the self, to face the truth of what we carry, what we seek, what we fear. The fellowship was blindfolded, a condition of their passage, and in that blindness they walked deeper into the wood. Frodo felt the ring grow quiet, its voice dulled by the power of the golden wood, yet its weight remained a constant reminder of his burden. The blindfold was no mere cloth, but a symbol, a stripping away of sight, of certainty, of the illusion that the path can be seen. To walk blind is to trust not in the eyes, but in the heart, in the unseen light that Gandalf sought in Moria's depths. Frodo's steps were slow, his hand brushing the bark of a malon tree, and in that touch he felt a pulse, a life that sang of ages past, of a world that endured despite shadow. They came at last to Caras Galadon, the heart of Lothlorien, where the Lady Galadriel awaited. Her eyes, bright as stars, deep as the sea, met each of them, and in that gaze they were known. Galadriel was no queen, but a light, a keeper of the ancient fire, her power not in dominion, but in understanding. "You have come through great peril," she said, her voice a melody that stirred the soul. "Yet the greatest peril lies within. Tolkien gives us Galadriel not as a saviour, but as a guide, one who sees the heart, who offers not answers but questions. To stand before her is to stand before the truth, to see the self-reflected, to choose between the light and the shadow." Frodo felt her gaze most keenly, for he bore the ring, and she knew its weight. "I see your burden," she said, and her words were not comfort, but acknowledgement, a recognition of the cost he paid. Frodo's heart trembled, for in her eyes he saw not only his fear, but his hope, his longing for the Shire, for peace, for an end to the journey. The ring stirred its voice a hiss. She could take me, she could wield me. But Galadriel's smile was gentle, her voice firm. "I will not take it," she said, "though I do not deny its power." In her refusal, Tolkien offers a truth. The greatest strength is not in seizing power, but in choosing to bear the burden, to walk the path, to trust in the light unseen. The fellowship rested in Lothlorien. Their bodies healed, their hearts still raw. Frodo sat beneath a malorn tree, the star-glass given by Galadriel in his hand, its light a faint glow in the twilight. Sam sat beside him, his eyes on the stars, his heart on the Shire. "Do you think we'll ever see it again, Mr. Frodo?" he asked, and the question was a wound, a hope, a prayer. Frodo did not answer, for he could not. The ring was heavy, the path uncertain, the light of Gandalf gone. Yet in Sam's voice, in the star-glass's glow, in the whisper of the trees, Frodo felt a stirring, a memory of the light. Gandalf saw a light that endured, though the darkness grew. And so we linger here in the Golden Wood, where time seems to pause, where the heart is tested, where the unseen light calls us forward. The fellowship will go on as we must, bearing their burdens, seeking their truths. Frodo will carry the ring. Sam his love, Aragorn his legacy, each a thread in the tapestry of Tolkien's myth. And we too will walk with them through the shadows toward the light, trusting in a hope we cannot see but know. For in the tales of Middle-earth, as in the tales of our own hearts, the silence is never empty. It is the space where the light is found, where the soul is forged, where the journey continues, unbroken, eternal. The leaves of Lothlorien whispered secrets older than the stars, their golden glow a fragile shield against the shadow that lingered in the fellowship's hearts. Caras Galadon, the city of the elves, was a haven. Yet it was no sanctuary from the truth. Here in the heart of the Golden Wood time seemed to pause, but the burdens of the world did not. Frodo Baggins stood beneath a malon tree, the star-glass of Galadriel cradled in his hands, its faint light a pulse that echoed his own uncertain heart. The one ring hung heavy at his neck, its voice now a constant murmur, weaving doubt and desire into his thoughts. Samwise Gamgee sat nearby, his eyes tracing the canopy, his heart tethered to the Shire, yet bound to Frodo's side. Aragorn, son of Arathorn, stood apart, his gaze distant, as if he saw not the beauty of the wood, but the weight of the path ahead. The fellowship rested, but rest was no reprieve from the questions that stirred within them. Questions born in the darkness of Moria, sharpened by the light of Galadriel's gaze. What does it mean to see the self, to stand before a mirror that reveals not the face, but the soul? In the tales of Middle-earth crafted by J.R.R. Tolkien's hand, the heart is the true battlefield where fear and hope, temptation and faith wage their silent war. Lothlorien is no mere refuge, but a crucible, a place where the fellowship must face not only the ring, but themselves. Gandalf's fall in Moria stripped them of their guide, leaving them to walk a path unmarked by certainty. Now, in the Golden Wood, they stand before Galadriel, whose eyes see all, whose words cut deeper than any blade. Here, the light Gandalf sought in Moria's depths is not given, but sought, not found, but chosen in the quiet moments where the heart decides its truth. Galadriel led Frodo to the mirror, a basin of silver water beneath the stars, its surface still as glass, yet alive with visions. "What you see is not certain," she said, her voice a melody that held both warning and invitation. "The mirror shows what was, what is, and what may yet be." Frodo hesitated, his hand straying to the ring, its weight a constant pull, its voice a hiss of fear. To look into the mirror was to risk seeing not only the world, but himself, his doubts, his desires, the shadow that grew with every step. Yet he stepped forward, drawn by a need he could not name, a longing for the light Gandalf had trusted even in the abyss. The water rippled, and Frodo saw the Shire burning its green hills, blackened its rivers choked with ash. Gandalf falling, his staff broken, his cry swallowed by the dark, and the eye of Sauron, a flame that saw him, knew him, called him. Frodo recoiled, his breath sharp, his heart a storm. The ring burned against his chest, its voice now a scream. You cannot escape. You cannot win. Yield to me and be free. Temptation is the ring's truest power, not in its promises of dominion, but in its offer of release of an end to the burden, the fear, the endless road. Tolkien weaves this truth into Frodo's tale, for the ring is not merely an object, but a mirror, reflecting the heart's deepest weaknesses, its most desperate hopes. Frodo's struggle is not with Sauron alone, but with the part of himself that longs to surrender, to lay down the weight and walk away. Yet Galadriel's voice was steady, her eyes unyielding. You have seen, she said, but seeing is not choosing. What will you do? Sam, ever watchful, stepped to Frodo's side, his face pale but resolute. He too looked into the mirror, though he did not wish it. He saw the Shire not burning but fading, its gardens untended, its paths overgrown. He saw himself old and alone, his hands empty, his heart heavy with a longing he could not name. I want to go home, Sam said, his voice breaking. And in those words Tolkien gives us the ache of every soul that loves, that sacrifices, that bears the cost of loyalty. Sam's burden is not the ring, but Frodo, the friend he cannot abandon, the master he cannot fail. The mirror showed him his heart, and his heart was the Shire. Yet he turned from it, his eyes on Frodo, his choice already made. Galadriel's gaze fell upon them both, and in her eyes they saw not judgment, but understanding. The ring is a heavy burden, she said, but heavier still is the heart that carries it and the heart that guards it. Tolkien's Galadriel is no mere sorceress, but a keeper of truths, one who sees the soul and speaks its name. She offered Frodo no comfort, for comfort is a lie when the path is hard. Instead, she offered him clarity, the chance to see the cost of his choice, to weigh it, to carry it knowingly. To Frodo, she was a light not of warmth, but of revelation, a reminder of the unseen fire Gandalf served, the flame that endures though the darkness grows. The Fellowship lingered in Lothlorien, their days filled with the music of the elves, their nights heavy with the silence of their thoughts. Aragorn walked the paths alone, his heart torn between duty and desire. He bore the sword of Elendil reforged, yet its weight was nothing compared to the legacy it carried. Isildur, his ancestor, had held. The ring had chosen power over sacrifice, and that choice haunted Aragorn, a shadow he could not outrun. In Lothlorien, where the past and present entwined, he felt the eyes of the elves upon him, their songs a reminder of the kings who had failed, the hopes that had faded. "What am I to do?" he asked the stars. But the stars were silent, as Gandalf had been silent in Moria's depths. Tolkien gives us Aragorn not as a hero, but as a man, one who knows the cost of leadership, who feels the pull of a throne he does not seek, who trusts in a light he cannot see. Legolas the elf stood upon a flet, his eyes on the horizon, his heart heavy with the memory of ages. Lothlorien was his kin, yet it was also a farewell, a reminder that the time of the elves was fading. "The world is changing," he said to Gimli, his voice soft, his words a song of loss. Gimli, son of Gloin, sat at his side, his hands tracing the carvings of a wooden staff, his heart still in Moria. "And yet, we fight," Gimli said, his voice gruff, but not without hope. Their friendship, born in the shadow of loss, was a light in itself, a bond that defied the divisions of their peoples. Tolkien weaves this truth into their tale. The light we seek is not only in the stars, but in the hands we clasp, the voices we hear, the trust we build against the dark. Boromir's struggle grew sharper in the Golden Wood, his heart a battlefield where duty and desire clashed. He watched Frodo, his eyes drawn to the ring, though he tried to look away. Gondor needs strength, he thought, and the ring answered its voice, a promise of victory, of a city saved, of a father's pride. Boromir was no traitor, but a man, and Tolkien gives us his heart with all its flaws, its fears, its hopes. In Lothlorien, where the air was clear and the truth unyielding, Boromir's temptation was not hidden, but exposed, a wound that bled in silence. He spoke little, but his silence was loud, a cry for a world where sacrifice was not the only path. Merry and Pippin, hobbits of the Shire, found solace in the songs of the elves, though their hearts were heavy. Pippin's guilt lingered, the memory of the stone, the well, the Balrog's fire. "I wish I'd never come," he said to Merry, his voice small, his eyes on the ground. Merry, ever steady, took his hand. "But you did," he said, "and you're here, and that's enough." Tolkien's hobbits are not defined by their strength, but by their resilience, their ability to bear the weight of their choices, to walk on, though the heart aches. Merry and Pippin were no warriors, but their presence was a light, a reminder that even the smallest souls can carry the greatest hopes. The days in Lothlorien passed like a dream, yet the world beyond did not wait. The Fellowship knew they must leave, though the path ahead was uncertain. Galadriel gave them gifts, each a symbol, a light to carry into the dark. To Frodo, the star-glass, a phial of light that held the radiance of Arundel's star, a beacon against despair. To Sam, a box of earth from her orchard, a promise of growth, of home, of a world that could be healed. To Aragorn, a sheath for Andúril, a reminder of his heritage, his duty, his hope. Each gift was a mirror reflecting the heart of its bearer, a call to trust in the unseen, to walk the path though the shadow grew. They departed in boats upon the Anduin, the river's current carrying them south toward a fate none could foresee. Frodo sat at the prow, the star-glass in his hand, the ring at his chest. Sam was beside him, his eyes on the water, his heart on Frodo. Aragorn steered his face, set his mind on the choices ahead. The others followed their voices, hushed, their hearts heavy with the memory of Lothlorien, of Gandalf, of the light they sought. The river was no mere path, but a symbol, a flow of time, of fate, of the inexorable pull of the world. Tolkien gives us the Anduin, not as a road, but as a question. Where does the heart go when the guide is gone, when the light is hidden, when the burden grows? Frodo felt the ring's voice grow louder, its promises sharper, its threats more vivid. "You are alone," it said, "and you will fail." Yet the star-glass glowed a faint but steady light, a reminder of Galadriel's words, of Gandalf's faith, of the unseen fire that burned in Moria's depths. Frodo's heart was a battlefield, but he was not alone. Sam's hand rested on his shoulder, Aragorn's eyes watched the horizon. The Fellowship's presence was a thread that bound him to hope. Tolkien's tale is not one of triumph, but of endurance, of the choice to carry on, to trust in the light, though the darkness grows. The river carried them toward Amon Hen, the Hill of Sight, where the path would divide, where choices would be made, where the heart would be tested once more. Frodo felt the weight of that moment approaching, a shadow that loomed larger than the ring itself. Aragorn sensed it too. His hand on Andúril, his heart torn between Frodo's burden and the call of Gondor. Boromir's eyes were dark, his thoughts a storm, the ring's voice loud in his heart. The Fellowship was no army, but a fragile bond, a light that flickered but did not fade. Tolkien gives us their journey, not as a quest, but as a pilgrimage, a walk through the shadows of the soul, a search for the light that Gandalf saw, the light that endures. And so we drift with them upon the Anduin, where the water sings of time and loss, where the heart is tested, where the unseen light calls us forward. The Fellowship will go on as we must, bearing their burdens, seeking their truths. Frodo will carry the ring, Sam his love, Aragorn his legacy, each a thread in the tapestry of Tolkien's myth. And we too will walk with them through the shadows toward the light, trusting in a hope we cannot see but know. For in the tales of Middle-earth, as in the tales of our own hearts, the mirror shows not only the shadow, but the light, the choice, the path that leads ever on. The Anduin flowed like a vein of the world, its waters carrying the Fellowship southward toward a horizon heavy with fate. The river's song was soft but relentless, a murmur of time and choice that echoed in the hearts of those who rode its current. Frodo Baggins sat at the prow of his boat, the star-glass of Galadriel, a faint glow in his hand, the one ring, a ceaseless weight at his chest. Its voice was no longer a whisper, but a tide pulling at his thoughts, promising power, threatening despair. Samwise Gamgee, ever near, watched Frodo with eyes that held both love and fear, his hands steady on the paddle, his heart anchored to a promise he would not break. Aragorn, son of Arathorn, steered with a quiet resolve, though his gaze was distant, tracing paths unseen, weighing choices unmade. The Fellowship. Legolas, Gimli. Boromir. Merry and Pippin followed in their boats, their silence a fragile thread, stretched taut by the memory of Moria, the grace of Lothlorien, and the shadow of what lay ahead. What does it mean to stand at the edge of fracture, to feel the bonds that hold us begin to fray? In the tales of Middle-earth woven by J.R.R. Tolkien's hand, unity is not a given, but a choice, a delicate balance tested by fear, desire, and the weight of the self. The Anduin is no mere river, but a crucible, a mirror reflecting the heart's divisions, the soul's temptations, the light that flickers in the face of shadow. Gandalf's fall in Moria stripped the Fellowship of their guide. Lothlorien revealed their truths. Now, on the river's flow, they face the moment where choices become fates, where the light Gandalf saw must be sought not in the stars, but in the breaking of the heart. The days on the Anduin were long, the nights heavy with the weight of silence. Frodo felt the ring's presence grow, its voice weaving a tapestry of doubt. "You are alone," it said, "and the world will break you." The star-glass, though it glowed, seemed small against the vastness of the river, the shadow of the east. Frodo's hand strayed to the ring, his fingers brushing its cold surface, and in that touch he felt the pull of surrender, the lure of an end to the journey. Tolkien gives us Frodo, not as a hero, but as a soul, one who carries not only the ring, but the human struggle to endure, to choose the path, though the cost is great. The ring is no mere object, but a question: will you bear the burden, or will you yield to the shadow within? Sam saw the change in Frodo, the way his eyes grew distant, his shoulders bowed. He did not speak of it, for Sam was not one for grand words, but his presence was a light, a quiet flame that burned steady in the dark. He cooked their meals simple as they were, and shared his stories of the Shire tales of gardens, of stars, of home. "Do you remember the old forest, Mr. Frodo?" he asked one evening, his voice soft, his eyes bright. "How we thought we'd never get out, but we did." Frodo nodded, a faint smile touching his lips, and in that moment Tolkien offers us a truth. Love is not a shield, but a spark, a light that kindles hope when all else fades. Sam's stories were not escapes, but anchors, reminders of why the journey mattered, of what waited beyond the shadow. Aragorn's heart was a storm, though his face betrayed nothing. He bore the weight of leadership, a mantle he had not sought, yet could not refuse. The sword Andúril reforged from the shards of Narsil was a symbol of his heritage, but also a reminder of its failures. Isildur, his ancestor, had held the ring and chosen power, a choice that echoed in Aragorn's blood, in the eyes of the elves, in the songs of Lothlorien. "What path do I take?" he asked himself, his voice lost in the river's song. To follow Frodo was to honor the ring's destruction, the hope of the world. To turn to Gondor was to answer the call of his people, the cry of a city under siege. Tolkien gives us Aragorn not as a king, but as a man, one who feels the pull of duty and desire, who seeks the light Gandalf trusted, though the way is unclear. Boromir's struggle was no longer silent, but a fire that burned in his eyes, his hands, his voice. He sat in his boat, his gaze fixed on Frodo the Ring, a beacon he could not ignore. "Gondor bleeds," he said, his words sharp, though he tried to soften them. "We wander while my people die." The ring answered its voice, a promise of strength, of victory, of a city saved from shadow. Boromir was no traitor, but a son, a warrior, a man who carried the weight of a father's pride, a brother's hope, a nation's despair. Tolkien weaves this truth into Boromir's tale. Temptation is not a fall, but a choice, a moment where the heart decides between the self and the greater good. Boromir's eyes were dark, his thoughts a storm, and the fellowship felt the weight of his unrest, a shadow that grew with every mile. Legolas and Gimli, bound by a friendship forged in Moria's depths, found solace in each other's company. Legolas stood at the bow of their boat, his eyes on the stars, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the world was changing. "The river carries us to an end," he said, his voice a melody of sorrow. Gimli at his side gripped his axe, his thoughts on Khazad-dûm, on the tombs of his kin. "And yet we row," he said, his voice gruff but warm. Their bond was a light, a defiance of the shadow that sought to divide. Tolkien gives us their friendship not as a plot, but as a symbol, a reminder that the light we seek is not only in the heavens, but in the hands we hold, the trust we build, the love that endures. Merry and Pippin, hobbits of the Shire, clung to each other. Their laughter muted their hearts heavy with the memory of Gandalf, the weight of their own smallness. Pippin's guilt was a constant shadow, the stone in Moria's well, a wound that would not heal. "I'm no use to anyone," he said, his voice small, his eyes on the water. Merry ever the elder took his hand. "You're here, Pip," he said, "and that's more than enough." Tolkien's hobbits are not heroes, but hearts resilient and true, bearing the weight of their choices, their fears, their hopes. Merry and Pippin were no warriors, but their presence was a light, a reminder that even the smallest souls can shape the world. The river carried them to the Argonath, the pillars of the kings, where the statues of Isildur and Anarion stood like giants, their hands raised, their eyes fixed on the north. Aragorn paused, his breath catching his heart, stirred by the sight of his ancestors, their legacy carved in stone. "Long have I wandered," he said, his voice low, but the blood of Númenor flows still. The Argonath was no mere monument, but a mirror reflecting Aragorn's heritage, his duty, his fear of failure. Tolkien gives us this moment not as a triumph, but as a question. What does it mean to claim a legacy, to bear the weight of the past, to trust in a light that may not shine? They camped at Parth Galen near the falls of Rauros, where the river roared like a warning, its voice a reminder that the path could not be delayed. The fellowship was tense, their bonds strained, their hearts heavy with the choices that loomed. Frodo wandered alone, seeking silence, seeking clarity, but the ring followed its voice, a constant pull. "You cannot do this," it said. "You will fail, and all will burn." Frodo's heart was a battlefield, his thoughts torn between duty and despair, between the light of Galadriel's star-glass and the shadow of Sauron's eye. Tolkien gives us Frodo's struggle, not as a drama, but as a truth. The greatest battles are fought within, where the soul decides its path, where the light is chosen, not given. Boromir followed Frodo, his steps heavy, his heart a storm. "I would speak with you," he said, his voice strained, his eyes bright with a fire that was not hope. Frodo turned his hand on the ring, his heart wary. Boromir's words came fast, a torrent of fear and desire. "The ring could save us," he said. "It could save Gondor, end the war, spare countless lives." The ring answered, its voice loud in Boromir's heart, promising power, promising peace. Boromir reached for Frodo, his hand trembling, his eyes wild. "Give it to me," he said, and in that moment the thread of the fellowship snapped the light. They shared, flickered, the shadow grew. Frodo fled the ring's weight, a chain, his heart pounding with fear and sorrow. He donned the ring, its power cloaking him, but also binding him closer to its will. The world grew grey, the eye of Sauron loomed, and Frodo felt the cost of his choice, the isolation of the ring-bearer's path. Tolkien gives us this moment not as a betrayal, but as a revelation. The ring divides not only the world, but the self-offering power, at the cost of connection, strength, at the cost of love. Frodo's flight was no cowardice, but a choice, a step toward the light he could not yet see, the light Gandalf trusted in Moria's depths. Boromir fell to his knees, his hands empty, his heart broken by the weight of his own actions. "What have I done?" he whispered, and the words were a prayer, a plea for forgiveness, for redemption. Tolkien gives us Boromir, not as a villain, but as a man, one who falls, but does not break, who faces the shadow within, and chooses to rise. Boromir's tears were a light, not of triumph but of truth, a reminder that the heart can falter, yet still seek the good. Aragorn found Boromir, his eyes sharp with concern, his hand on Andúril. "What has happened?" he asked, his voice steady, though his heart feared the answer. Boromir confessed his words, halting his shame, a wound that bled. "I tried to take the ring," he said, "and Frodo is gone." Aragorn's face was stone, but his heart was a storm. He did not judge, for he knew the ring's power, the temptation that haunted his own blood. "We must find him," he said, and in those words Tolkien offers us Aragorn's choice to lead not for glory, but for love, to seek the light, though the path is broken. The Fellowship scattered their voices calling Frodo's name, their hearts heavy with fear and guilt. Merry and Pippin ran into the woods, their steps reckless, their thoughts on Frodo, on Gandalf, on the hope they could not lose. Legolas and Gimli followed their bond, a light in the chaos, their eyes sharp for danger. But danger found them first, as orc servants of Saruman descended, their blades gleaming, their cries a storm of malice. Merry and Pippin were taken, their voices lost in the clash, and the Fellowship's thread frayed further, its light dimmed by loss. Frodo, hidden by the ring, reached Amon Hen, the Hill of Sight, and climbed its ancient seat. He removed the ring, his breath ragged, his heart torn. The world was clear again, but the eye was near its gaze, a fire that sought him. Frodo saw the war, the shadows spreading, the hope of the world fading. Yet he saw too the star glass, the memory of Galadriel, the light Gandalf had trusted. "I will go on," he said, his voice small but resolute. Tolkien gives us Frodo's choice, not as a triumph, but as a sacrifice, a step into the dark, a trust in the unseen light that endures. Sam found him, his face flushed, his heart fierce with love. "You can't go alone, Mr. Frodo," he said, his voice breaking but firm. Frodo hesitated, his heart torn between the need to protect Sam and the truth that he could not walk alone. "I'm glad you're with me, Sam," he said, and in those words Tolkien offers us a light, not of flame or star, but of loyalty, of love, of the bond that carries us through the shadow. Frodo and Sam took a boat, the river carrying them east, toward Mordor, toward the fire, toward the light they could not yet see. Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli stood at Path Galen, their hearts heavy with the loss of Frodo, of Merry, of Pippin. Boromir joined them, his face pale, his eyes clear with a new resolve. "I will fight for them," he said, his voice steady, his heart seeking redemption. Aragorn nodded his hand on Boromir's shoulder, his eyes on the horizon. "We will not abandon Merry and Pippin," he said, and in that choice Tolkien gives us the Fellowship's light, not unbroken, but enduring, a flame that burns, though the thread is frayed. And so we stand with them at the edge of the river, where the world divides, where choices become fates, where the heart seeks the light Gandalf saw. The Fellowship is broken, but not lost, its members scattered, but not forsaken. Frodo and Sam will walk toward Mordor, Aragorn and his companions toward the captives, each bearing their burdens, each seeking their truths. And we too will walk with them through the shadows toward the light, trusting in a hope we cannot see, but know. For in the tales of Middle-earth, as in the tales of our own hearts, the breaking is not the end, but the beginning, the moment where the light is chosen, where the journey continues, eternal. The Anduin's current bore Frodo and Sam eastward, its waters a quiet pulse beneath the small boat that carried them toward Mordor's shadow. The world around them grew stark, the green of Path Galen fading into the barren hills of the Eamon Muil, where stone and sky seemed to conspire in silence. Frodo Baggins sat at the bow, the One Ring, a cold weight against his chest, its voice a ceaseless murmur, weaving fear and doubt into his thoughts. The star glass of Galadriel, tucked within his cloak, offered a faint glow, but its light seemed fragile against the vastness of the journey ahead. Samwise Gamgee, steadfast as the earth, paddled with steady hands, his eyes fixed on Frodo, his heart a fortress against the despair that loomed. Far behind, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli pursued the orcs, who had taken Merry and Pippin their path, diverging their purpose unbroken. Boromir, redeemed in his final stand, lay still, his horn silent, his sacrifice a light that lingered in their hearts. What does it mean to walk a path alone yet bound by love? In the tales of Middle-earth crafted by J.R.R. Tolkien's hand, solitude is not emptiness, but a crucible where the soul is tested, where the light of hope must be kindled within. The breaking of the fellowship at Amon Hen was no mere fracture, but a forging, a moment where each soul chose its road, not for glory, but for truth. Frodo and Sam, now alone, carry the ring toward Mordor, while Aragorn and his companions chase a different hope, their paths divided, yet woven into the same tapestry of sacrifice and faith. The light Gandalf saw in Moria's depths, the unseen fire he trusted, burns still not in the stars, but in the hearts that endure the lonely road. Frodo's eyes were heavy with the weight of his choice. To leave the fellowship to spare them the ring's shadow was a sacrifice, but it was also a burden. The Emyn Muil's jagged cliffs loomed like the edges of his own heart, sharp and unyielding, offering no comfort, no clarity. The ring's voice was louder now, a pulse that matched his breath, promising release, threatening ruin. "You will fail," it said, "and all you love will burn." Frodo's hand strayed to the star-glass, its light a whisper of Lothlorien, of Galadriel's gaze, of the trust Gandalf had placed in him. Yet trust was a fragile thing, easily drowned by the ring's tide. Tolkien gives us Frodo not as a savior, but as a soul, one who carries the weight of the world not because he is strong, but because he must. The ring is no mere burden, but a mirror reflecting the fear that gnaws, the temptation that lures, the choice that defines. Sam, ever watchful, saw the shadow in Frodo's eyes, the way his shoulders bowed, his hands trembled. He did not speak of it, for Sam's strength was not in words but in presence, in the quiet acts that anchored them both. He unpacked their dwindling supplies, sharing a piece of lembas, the elven bread that sustained more than the body. "It's not much, Mr. Frodo," he said, his voice soft, his eyes bright, with a hope he refused to relinquish. "But it'll keep us going." Frodo ate, though the taste was faint, and in that small act Tolkien offers us a sacrament, the sharing of bread, the gift of love, the light that burns in the ordinary, the enduring, the true. Sam's loyalty was not a shield, but a flame, a spark that kindled hope when the world grew dark. The Emyn Muil was a labyrinth, its paths twisting, its stones sharp. Frodo and Sam wandered, their steps slow, their hearts heavy with the weight of the unknown. The ring's presence drew shadows not of orcs, but of the mind whispering of failure, of betrayal, of a world lost to fire. Frodo's dreams were haunted by the eye of Sauron, its gaze a flame that sought him, knew him, called him. "I am alone," he thought, and the words were a wound, a truth he could not escape. Yet Sam was there, his hand steady, his voice a song of the Shire tales, of gardens, of stars, of home. "Do you think we'll see the Oliphants, Mr. Frodo?" he asked, his tone light, though his heart was heavy. Frodo smiled, a faint echo of joy, and in that moment Tolkien reminds us the lonely road is never truly solitary, for love walks beside us, a light that does not fade. Far to the west, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli ran across the plains of Rohan, their hearts set on Merry and Pippin, their bodies driven beyond exhaustion. Aragorn led, his eyes sharp, his mind tracing the orc's trail. The loss of Frodo of Boromir was a weight he carried, but he did not falter. "We will find them," he said, his voice steady, though his heart was a storm. Andúril hung at his side, its blade a symbol of his heritage, but also a reminder of its failures. Isildur's shadow lingered, a whisper of temptation, of the ring's power, of the choice that had shaped the world. Tolkien gives us Aragorn, not as a king, but as a man, one who bears the weight of leadership, who feels the eyes of his companions, who trusts in a light he cannot see. Legolas ran with the grace of the elves, his senses sharp, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the world was changing. The earth speaks of haste, he said, his voice a melody of urgency, his eyes on the horizon. Gimli at his side matched his pace, though his legs were shorter, his heart no less fierce. We will not let them fall, he said, his axe a comfort, his thoughts on Moria, on the pride of his kin. Their friendship forged in shadow was a light, a bond that defied the divisions of their peoples. Tolkien weaves this truth into their tale. The light we seek is not only in the stars, but in the trust we build, the hands we clasp, the hope we share against the dark. Merry and Pippin, captives of the orcs, were driven across the plains, their wrists bound, their hearts bruised but unbroken. Pippin's guilt was a constant shadow, the memory of Moria's well a wound that bled anew. I've ruined everything, he thought, his eyes on the ground, his steps faltering. Merry, ever the elder, stayed close, his voice low, his words a lifeline. We're still here, Pip, he said, and that's something. Tolkien's hobbits are not heroes, but hearts small and resilient, bearing the weight of their fears, their hopes, their love. Merry and Pippin were no warriors, but their presence was a light, a spark that burned in the shadow of captivity, a reminder that even the smallest souls can defy the dark. Frodo and Sam, lost in the Emyn Muil, found no path, only stone and despair. The ring's weight grew, its voice a storm that drowned Frodo's thoughts. I cannot do this, he said, his voice breaking, his eyes on the barren hills. Sam knelt beside him, his hand on Frodo's shoulder, his heart fierce with love. You don't have to do it alone, Mr. Frodo, he said, his voice steady, his eyes bright with a truth he would not surrender. I'm here, and I ain't going nowhere. Tolkien gives us Sam not as a servant, but as a light one, who carries not the ring, but the hope that sustains it, the love that makes the burden bearable. Frodo nodded, his heart stirred, and they pressed on their steps slow, their path uncertain. The creature Gollum, drawn by the ring's call, followed them, his eyes gleaming in the dark, his heart torn between desire and despair. Frodo sensed him a shadow at the edge of his thoughts, a reminder of what the ring could do, what it had done. Gollum was no mere monster, but a mirror, a reflection of the ring's power of the soul consumed by its promise. Tolkien gives us Gollum not as a villain, but as a warning, a truth that the ring spares no one, that the light within can be dimmed, but never fully extinguished. Frodo's pity stirred a faint echo of Gandalf's words in the Shire. Do not be too eager to deal out death in judgment. In that pity, Tolkien offers us a light not of power, but of mercy, of the choice to see the soul beneath the shadow. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli reached the edge of Fangorn Forest, their trail faint, their hope strained. The orcs were dead slain by Rohan's riders, but Merry and Pippin were gone, their fate unknown. Aragorn knelt, his fingers tracing the earth, his heart heavy with the weight of leadership. We have failed them, he said, his voice low, his eyes on the ground. Legolas placed a hand on his shoulder, his voice soft. The path is not ended, he said, and hope remains. Gimli nodded, his axe in hand, his heart fierce. We will find them, he said, or die trying. Tolkien gives us their resolve, not as a triumph, but as a choice, a trust in the light. Gandalf saw a refusal to let the shadow win. In the Emyn Muil, Frodo and Sam captured Gollum, his wretched form trembling, his eyes bright with fear and longing. Frodo bound him with an elven rope, his heart torn between pity and caution. We need a guide, he said, his voice steady, though his thoughts were troubled. Sam scowled, his hand on his sword, his heart wary. He's a villain, Mr. Frodo, he said, and no good'll come of this. Yet Frodo's choice was made not for trust, but for necessity, for the hope that even a broken soul could serve the light. Tolkien gives us this moment not as a mistake, but as a question. What does it mean to offer mercy, to seek the light in the shadow, to trust when the heart doubts? The three companions, Frodo, Sam and Gollum, climbed from the Emyn Muil, their path leading to the dead marshes where the air was thick with decay, the ground treacherous with the ghosts of the past. Frodo felt the ring's weight grow, its voice a chorus of despair, its power drawing the eye closer. The star-glass glowed, but its light was faint, a spark in a world of shadow. Sam stayed close, his hand never far from Frodo's, his heart a beacon that would not falter. Gollum led his steps, sly, his thoughts a storm of desire and fear. Tolkien gives us the dead marshes, not as a place, but as a symbol, a mirror of the soul's struggle, where the past lingers, where the light must be sought through the weight of memory and loss. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli entered Fangorn, its trees, ancient, its air heavy with a presence that watched. There they found a figure cloaked in white, his staff glowing, his eyes bright with a fire they thought lost. Gandalf Aragorn said, his voice a whisper, his heart alight with hope. Gandalf the White, reborn from the abyss, stood before them, his presence a light that banished doubt. "I have passed through fire and death," he said, "and returned to serve the hope of the world." Tolkien gives us Gandalf's return not as a miracle but as a truth. The light endures though the darkness seems to win, and those who fall may rise to guide again. Merry and Pippin escaped from the orcs, found refuge with Treebeard the Ent, whose voice was the song of the earth, whose heart was stirred by the loss of his trees. "We are not alone," Merry said, his eyes bright, his heart fierce with a new purpose. Pippin nodded, his guilt easing, his hope kindled. Tolkien gives us their journey not as a side path but as a light, a reminder that even the smallest souls can wake the world, can carry the hope that shapes the future. Frodo, Sam and Gollum pressed on the dead marshes, a weight that pressed upon their hearts. Frodo's steps were slow, his eyes haunted the ring, a chain that bound him to despair. Sam's hand was steady, his voice a song of the Shire, his love a light that would not fade. Gollum's eyes gleamed, his heart torn his path, a shadow that led ever closer to betrayal. And yet in their steps, in their choices, in their trust, the light Gandalf saw burned still a flame that endured, though the darkness grew. And so we walk with them through the marshes, through the forest, through the shadow where the heart is tested, where the light is sought. Frodo and Sam will face the fire, Aragorn and his companions, the war, Merry and Pippin, the awakening, each bearing their burdens, each seeking their truths. And we too will walk with them through the shadows toward the light, trusting in a hope we cannot see but know. For in the tales of Middle-earth, as in the tales of our own hearts, the lonely road is never the end, but the path where the light is kindled, where the journey continues eternal. The dead marshes stretched before Frodo, Sam and Gollum like a wound in the earth, its air thick with the stench of decay, its waters murky with the ghosts of battles long past. The sky above was a shroud heavy with clouds that hid the stars, leaving only the faint glow of Galadriel's star-glass to pierce the gloom. Frodo Baggins walked with faltering steps, the One Ring, a relentless weight at his chest, its voice a tide that surged with every breath, whispering despair, promising power, threatening ruin. Samwise Gamgee, ever steadfast, stayed close, his eyes sharp with concern, his heart a beacon of love that refused to dim. Gollum led his gaunt form, slinking through the mire, his eyes gleaming with a hunger that was both fear and longing. Far to the west, Gandalf, the White, Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli moved toward Rohan, their purpose renewed, while Merry and Pippin with Treebeard stirred the ancient wrath of Fangorn. The fellowship, though scattered, was bound by a light unseen, a hope that endured in the shadow of Mordor's growing power. What does it mean to walk through the graves of the past, to carry a burden that binds you to the dead in the tales of Middle-earth? Woven by J.R.R. Tolkien's hand, the past is not a shadow that fades, but a presence that shapes a weight that tests the soul. The dead marshes are no mere swamp, but a mirror reflecting the heart's memories, its losses, its temptations to linger in what was, rather than face what is. Frodo and Sam, guided by Gollum, tread a path where the light Gandalf saw in Moria's depths must be sought not in the heavens, but in the will to go on, in the love that carries, in the mercy that dares to trust. The ring's power grows, but so does the hope that defies it, a flame that burns in the heart's quiet choices. Frodo's steps were heavy, each one a struggle against the mire and the ring's unyielding pull. The faces in the water ghostly visages of men, elves and orcs stared up at him, their eyes empty, their mouths frozen in silent cries. The dead marshes were a graveyard, a relic of the War of the Last Alliance, where Isildur fell, where the ring was lost and found. Frodo felt its history in his bones, its weight in his heart. "They call to me," he said, his voice barely a whisper, his eyes haunted by the dead. The ring's voice answered sharp and cold. "You will join them. You cannot escape." Tolkien gives us Frodo not as a hero, but as a soul, one who carries not only the ring, but the weight of its past, its power, its promise of despair. The star-glass glowed faintly, a reminder of Galadriel's light, but its warmth seemed distant, a star obscured by the marsh's fog. Sam, ever vigilant, saw the toll the marshes took on Frodo, the way his face grew pale, his eyes distant. He stayed close, his hand ready to steady his heart, fierce with a love that would not falter. "Don't look at them, Mr. Frodo," he said, his voice firm, though his own heart trembled at the sight of the dead. "They're gone, and we're not." Sam unpacked a small meal, a piece of lembas shared in the mire, and in that act, Tolkien offers us a truth: the ordinary is sacred, a light that shines in the darkest places, a gift that sustains when hope seems lost. Sam's presence was not a shield, but a spark, a flame that kindled Frodo's will, reminding him of the Shire of home, of why the journey mattered. Gollum's guidance was a necessity, but his presence was a shadow, a constant reminder of the ring's power to corrupt. His eyes, bright with longing, darted to Frodo, to the ring, his heart torn between servitude and desire. "We knows the way, precious," he hissed, his voice a mix of fear and cunning. "We helps the master." Yet Frodo saw the truth in Gollum's gaze, the hunger that had consumed Smeagol, the soul that lingered beneath the wreckage. "You were not so different from me," Frodo thought, his heart stirred by pity, by the memory of Gandalf's words. Pity may rule the fate of many. Tolkien gives us Gollum, not as a monster, but as a mirror, a reflection of what the ring could do, a warning that the light within is fragile, yet never fully lost. Frodo's mercy was a choice, a light that burned in the shadow of doubt, a trust that the path could still lead to good. The marshes were treacherous, their paths winding their waters deep with hidden perils. Frodo stumbled his foot, sinking into the mire, and for a moment he saw himself falling, joining the dead, his burden dragging him down. Sam's hand was there, pulling him free, his voice a steady anchor. "I've got you, Mr. Frodo," he said, his eyes bright with a love that defied the dark. Frodo clung to him, his heart a storm, the ring's voice loud in his mind. "He will leave you, all will leave you." Yet Sam's grip was firm, his presence a rebuke to the ring's lies. Tolkien weaves this truth into their tale. Love is not a promise of safety, but a strength that carries a light that endures when the world grows heavy. Far to the west, Gandalf the White led Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli toward Edoras, the golden hall of Rohan, where King Theoden sat enthralled by Saruman's lies. Gandalf's return was a light, a fire rekindled from the ashes of Moria. But it was not a triumph, only a call to fight on. "The war is upon us," he said, his voice steady, his eyes bright with the flame of Anor. "We must rouse the world to hope." Aragorn nodded, his heart stirred by the wizard's presence, though the weight of leadership lingered. Andúril was a symbol of his heritage, but also a reminder of its failures, of Isildur's choice, of the temptation that haunted his blood. Tolkien gives us Aragorn not as a king, but as a man, one who trusts in the light Gandalf saw, though the path is fraught with shadow. Legolas and Gimli followed their bond, a light in the gathering storm. Legolas's eyes were sharp, his senses alive to the land's unrest. "The earth is troubled," he said, his voice a melody of warning. Gimli gripped his axe, his heart fierce with the memory of Moria, of the pride of his kin. "Let the shadow come," he said, his voice gruff but resolute. Their friendship was a defiance, a light that burned against the divisions of their peoples, a reminder that hope is found not only in the stars, but in the trust we build, the hands we hold. Tolkien gives us their journey not as a quest, but as a pilgrimage, a walk through the shadows of the world, a search for the light that endures. Merry and Pippin, with Treebeard in Fangorn, stirred the Ents to war, their small voices waking an ancient wrath. "We are not powerless," Merry said, his eyes bright, his heart fierce with a purpose he had not known in the Shire. Pippin nodded, his guilt easing his hope kindled by the thought that they could make a difference. "We'll show them, Merry," he said, his voice small but resolute. Tolkien's hobbits are not heroes, but hearts resilient and true, bearing the weight of their choices, their fears, their hopes. Merry and Pippin were no warriors, but their presence was a light, a spark that woke the forest, a reminder that even the smallest souls can shape the world. In the dead marshes, Frodo's strength waned, the ring's weight a chain that bound his heart. The faces in the water called to him, their voices a chorus of despair, and for a moment he faltered, his hand reaching for the ring, its promise of release, a siren's song. Sam saw his heart lurching, his voice sharp with fear. "Don't you do it, Mr. Frodo," he said, his hand on Frodo's arm, his eyes fierce with love. "You're stronger than it is." Frodo's hand fell, his breath ragged, his heart stirred by Sam's words, by the star-glass's glow, by the memory of Gandalf's faith. Tolkien gives us this moment not as a victory, but as a choice, a refusal to yield, a trust in the light that burns within, though the shadow grows. Gollum's eyes gleamed his thoughts, a storm of desire and fear. He led them through the marshes, his path true, but his heart false. We takes them to the Black Gate. He thought his mind weaving plans, his soul torn by the ring's call. Yet Frodo's pity held him a fragile bond that kept the shadow at bay. He is bound to me, Frodo thought, as I am bound to the ring. Tolkien gives us their relationship not as an alliance, but as a question. What does it mean to trust the broken, to seek the light in the shadow, to hope? When the heart doubts, Frodo's mercy was a light, a flame that flickered but did not fade, a choice that shaped the path ahead. The marshes ended at last, the ground growing firmer, the air less heavy. Frodo and Sam stood at the edge of the Dagorlad, the plain before Mordor, where the Black Gate loomed its towers, a mockery of hope. Frodo's heart sank, the ring's weight a stone that crushed his will. "We cannot pass," he said, his voice hollow, his eyes on the gate's unyielding iron. Gollum cowered, his voice a hiss. "Not this way, precious," he said, his eyes sly, his heart alight with a new plan. "We knows another path, a secret way." Sam's eyes narrowed, his hand on his sword, his heart wary. "What's he playing at, Mr. Frodo?" he said, his voice low, his love a shield. Frodo nodded, his heart torn, but his choice made. "We follow him," he said, trusting not Gollum, but the light that had guided them through the marshes, the light Gandalf had seen. In Rohan, Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli reached Edoras, where Theoden sat under Saruman's spell, his heart shadowed, his kingdom faltering. Gandalf's staff glowed, his voice a thunder that broke the spell. "Rise, Theoden, and cast off despair," he said, his eyes bright with the flame of hope. Theoden stood, his heart stirred, his will renewed. "We will fight," he said, his voice steady, his eyes on the horizon. Tolkien gives us this moment not as a triumph, but as an awakening, a reminder that the light endures though the shadow seems to win, and those who falter may rise to fight again. Merry and Pippin with the Ents marched toward Isengard, their steps a drumbeat of wrath, their hearts alight with a purpose that burned brighter than fear. "We're part of this, Pip," Merry said, his voice fierce, his eyes bright. Pippin nodded, his heart steady, his hope a flame that would not fade. "We'll make them pay," he said, his voice small but fierce. Tolkien gives us their march not as a side path, but as a light, a spark that wakes the world, a reminder that even the smallest choices can shift the tide. Frodo, Sam and Gollum turned from the Black Gate, their path leading south toward the secret way Gollum promised. The ring's weight grew, its voice a storm that drowned Frodo's thoughts, its power drawing the eye closer. The star-glass glowed a faint but steady light, a reminder of Galadriel's words, of Gandalf's faith, of the unseen fire that burned in Moria's depths. Sam stayed close, his hand never far from Frodo's, his heart a beacon that would not falter. Gollum led his steps sly, his thoughts a shadow that led ever closer to betrayal. Yet in their steps, in their choices, in their trust, the light Gandalf saw burned still a flame that endured, though the darkness grew. And so we walk with them through the plain, through the hall, through the forest, where the heart is tested, where the light is sought. Frodo and Sam will face the shadow Gandalf and his companions, the war Merry and Pippin, the awakening, each bearing their burdens, each seeking their truths. And we too will walk with them through the shadows toward the light, trusting in a hope we cannot see, but know. For in the tales of Middle-earth, as in the tales of our own hearts, the weight of the past is not the end, but the path where the light is kindled, where the journey continues eternal. The ashen plains of Dagorlad faded behind Frodo, Sam and Gollum as they turned south, their path bending toward the jagged peaks of the Efelduath, the mountains of shadow. The air grew heavy, laced with the sulphurous breath of Mordor, and the sky was abruise, its light choked by clouds that seemed to pulse with malice. Frodo Baggins walked with a faltering gait, the One Ring. A leaden weight at his chest, its voice a relentless storm that tore at his thoughts, weaving despair with promises of release. The star-glass of Galadriel, tucked within his cloak, offered a faint glow, but its light was a whisper against the roar of the shadow that loomed. Samwise Gamgee, unyielding as the earth stayed close, his eyes sharp with love and fear, his heart a fortress against the darkness that sought to claim them. Gollum led his skeletal form slinking through the rocks, his eyes bright with a hunger that was both terror and desire, his mind weaving plans that flickered like shadows in a flame. Far to the west, Gandalf, the white Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli rallied Rohan's strength, while Merry and Pippin with the Ents marched on Isengard, their small voices waking a tide of wrath. The fellowship, though scattered, was bound by a light, unseen, a hope that burned in the face of despair. What does it mean to climb a path where every step is a wound, where the heart must choose between surrender and sacrifice? In the tales of Middle-earth crafted by J.R.R. Tolkien's hand, the journey is not a march to glory, but a pilgrimage through the soul's darkest valleys, where the light of hope must be kindled within. The stairs of Cirith Ungol, a secret path promised by Gollum, are no mere passage, but a crucible, a spiral of stone that tests the will, the love, the mercy that define us. Frodo and Sam, guided by a creature consumed by the ring's shadow, face a trial where the light Gandalf saw in Moria's depths must be sought not in the stars, but in the heart's refusal to break in the bond that endures, in the trust that dares to hope against hope. Frodo's breath was ragged, each step a battle against the ring's weight, which seemed to grow with every mile. The landscape was a desolation, its rocks sharp, its air thick with the stench of decay. The ring's voice was a chorus now, a cacophony of fear and temptation that drowned his thoughts. "You are nothing," it said, "and the world will crush you." Frodo's hand strayed to the star-glass, its faint light a memory of Lothlorien, of Galadriel's gaze, of Gandalf's faith in a fire unseen. Yet that faith was a fragile thread easily snapped by the ring's relentless pull. Tolkien gives us Frodo not as a champion, but as a soul, one who carries the weight of the world, not because he is mighty, but because he must. The ring is no mere object, but a mirror reflecting the heart's deepest fears, its most desperate desires, its choice to endure or yield. Sam saw the change in Frodo, the way his eyes grew hollow, his steps uncertain, his hands trembling as they brushed the ring. He stayed close, his hand ready to steady his heart, fierce with a love that would not falter. "We're getting there, Mr. Frodo," he said, his voice steady, though the path was grim. "One step at a time." Sam unpacked a dwindling piece of lembas, sharing it in the shadow of the mountains. And in that act, Tolkien offers us a sacrament, the gift of bread, the strength of love, the light that shines in the ordinary, the enduring, the true. Sam's presence was not a shield, but a flame, a spark that kindled Frodo's will, reminding him of the Shire of home, of the hope that lingered beyond the shadow. Gollum's guidance was a necessity, but his presence was a wound, a constant reminder of the ring's power to destroy. His eyes gleaming with longing darted to Frodo, to the ring, his heart torn between servitude and betrayal. "We climbs the stairs, precious," he hissed, his voice a mix of fear and cunning. "We takes the master to the secret way." Yet Frodo saw the truth in Gollum's gaze, the wreckage of Smeagol, the soul that flickered beneath the shadow. "He is bound to me," Frodo thought, his heart stirred by pity, by the memory of Gandalf's words in the Shire. Pity may rule the fate of many. Tolkien gives us Gollum not as a villain, but as a tragedy, a reflection of the ring's hunger, a warning that the light within is fragile yet never fully lost. Frodo's mercy was a choice, a light that burned in the shadow of doubt, a trust that the path could still lead to good. The stairs of Cirith. Ungol rose before them, a cruel spiral carved into the mountains, its steps narrow, its heights, dizzying its shadows, thick with menace. Frodo climbed his hands, scraping the stone, his heart heavy with the ring's weight. The air was thin, the silence oppressive, broken only by the scuff of Gollum's feet and Sam's steady breath. The ring's voice grew louder, its promises sharper, its threats more vivid. "You will fall," it said, "and all will burn." Frodo's dreams were haunted by the eye of Sauron, its gaze a flame that sought him, knew him, called him. "I am alone," he thought, and the words were a wound, a truth that cut deep. Yet Sam was there, his hand steady, his voice a song of the Shire tales of gardens of stars of home. "Do you think we'll see the sea, Mr. Frodo?" he asked, his tone light, though his heart was heavy. Frodo smiled a faint echo of joy, and in that moment, Tolkien reminds us, the darkest path is never truly solitary, for love walks beside us, a light that does not fade. Far to the west, Gandalf the White stood in the golden hall of Edoras, his staff a beacon, his voice a thunder that roused Theoden from despair. "The shadow grows," he said, "but the light endures." Aragorn at his side bore Andúril, its blade a symbol of his heritage, but also a reminder of its failures. Isildur's shadow lingered, a whisper of temptation, of the ring's power, of the choice that had shaped the world. "We ride to war," Aragorn said, his voice steady, though his heart was a storm. Tolkien gives us Aragorn not as a king, but as a man, one who trusts in the light Gandalf saw, though the path is fraught with shadow. Legolas and Gimli stood with him, their bond alight in the gathering storm. Legolas's eyes were sharp, his senses alive to the land's unrest. "The earth trembles," he said, his voice a melody of warning. Gimli gripped his axe, his heart fierce with the memory of Moria. "Let the shadow come," he said, his voice gruff but resolute. Their friendship was a defiance, a light that burned against the divisions of their peoples, a reminder that hope is found in the trust we build. Merry and Pippin with the Ents reached Isengard, their steps a drumbeat of wrath, their hearts alight with a purpose that burned brighter than fear. The Ents, roused by the hobbits' tales of loss, tore at Saruman's stronghold, their roots cracking stone, their voices a storm of ancient anger. "We're doing something," Pip Merry said, his eyes bright, his heart fierce with a new resolve. Pippin nodded his guilt, easing his hope kindled by the thought that they could make a difference. "We're not just baggage," he said, his voice small but fierce. "Tolkien's hobbits are not heroes, but hearts resilient and true, bearing the weight of their choices, their fears, their hopes." Merry and Pippin were no warriors, but their presence was a light, a spark that woke the forest, a reminder that even the smallest voices can shift the tide. On the stairs of Cirith Ungol, Frodo's strength waned, the ring's weight a chain that bound his heart. The steps seemed endless, each one a test, each one a wound. He stumbled his hand, catching the stone, his breath a gasp of pain. Sam was there, his arms steady, his voice fierce with love. "I've got you, Mr. Frodo," he said, his eyes bright with a truth he would not surrender. "We're not done yet." Frodo clung to him, his heart stirred by Sam's words, by the star-glass's glow, by the memory of Gandalf's faith. The ring's voice was loud, its promise of release a siren's song, but Sam's presence was louder, a light that drowned the shadow. Tolkien gives us this moment not as a victory, but as a choice, a refusal to yield a trust in the light that burns within, though the darkness grows. Gollum's eyes gleamed, his thoughts a storm of desire and fear. He led them higher, his path true, but his heart false. We takes them to the tunnel, he thought, his mind weaving a trap, his soul torn by the ring's call. Yet Frodo's pity held him a fragile bond that kept the shadow at bay. He is my burden too. Frodo thought, his heart heavy with the weight of mercy, with the hope that even a broken soul could serve the light. Tolkien gives us their relationship not as an alliance, but as a question. What does it mean to trust the fallen, to seek the light in the shadow, to hope? When the heart doubts, Frodo's mercy was a light, a flame that flickered but did not fade, a choice that shaped the path ahead. The stairs ended at last, giving way to a tunnel, its mouth a gaping wound in the mountain, its air thick with a stench that choked the soul. Gollum hesitated, his eyes darting, his voice a hiss. "This way, precious," he said, his heart alight with betrayal. Frodo felt a chill, a warning in his heart, but the ring's weight was heavier, its voice louder, drowning his doubts. Sam's hand tightened on his sword, his eyes narrow, his heart wary. "I don't like this, Mr. Frodo," he said, his voice low, his love a shield. Frodo nodded, his heart torn, but his choice made. "We must go on," he said, trusting not Gollum, but the light that had guided them through the marshes, the light Gandalf had seen in Moria's depths. In Rohan, Gandalf led Theoden's riders to Helm's Deep, where Saruman's army marched a tide of shadow that sought to crush the hope of men. Aragorn fought at the fore, his blade a flash of light, his heart fierce with a resolve that burned brighter than fear. Legolas's arrows flew, his eyes sharp, his voice a song of defiance. Gimli's axe sang his heart alight with the pride of his kin, his friendship with Legolas, a light that endured. Gandalf stood above his staff, a beacon, his voice a call to hope. "The dawn will come," he said, his eyes bright with the flame of Anor. Tolkien gives us this battle not as a triumph, but as a test, a reminder that the light endures, though the shadow seems to win, and those who fight may yet see the dawn. At Isengard, Merry and Pippin watched as the Ents broke Saruman's power, their flood, a cleansing fire, their wrath, a song of the earth. "We've done it, Pip," Merry said, his voice fierce, his eyes bright with a new purpose. Pippin nodded, his heart steady, his hope a flame that would not fade. "We're part of the story now," he said, his voice small but resolute. Tolkien gives us their victory not as a side path, but as a light, a spark that wakes the world, a reminder that even the smallest choices can shape the future. In the tunnel of Cirith Ungol, Frodo and Sam faced a darkness deeper than the marshes, a presence that was not merely shadow, but malice. Shelob the great spider lurked her webs, a trap woven by Gollum's betrayal. Frodo's heart faltered, the ring's weight a stone that crushed his will. Sam's hand was steady, his voice a song of the Shire, his love a light that would not fade. Gollum vanished, his betrayal complete, his heart consumed by the ring's shadow. Yet in their steps, in their choices, in their trust, the light Gandalf saw burned still, a flame that endured, though the darkness grew. And so we climb with them through the tunnel, through the battle, through the flood, where the heart is tested, where the light is sought. Frodo and Sam will face the spider Gandalf and his companions, the war Merry and Pippin, the awakening, each bearing their burdens, each seeking their truths. And we too will walk with them through the shadows toward the light, trusting in a hope we cannot see but know. For in the tales of Middle-earth, as in the tales of our own hearts, the darkest path is not the end, but the place where the light is kindled, where the journey continues eternal. The tunnel of Cirith Ungol was a wound in the earth, its darkness thicker than night, its air heavy with a malice that clung like damp rot. The walls pulsed with an unseen dread, and the silence was a predator waiting for the smallest sound to strike. Frodo Baggins stumbled through the gloom, the One Ring, a searing weight at his chest, its voice a relentless storm that clawed at his mind, weaving despair with whispers of surrender. The star-glass of Galadriel, clutched in his trembling hand, cast a frail light, a mere spark against the suffocating shadow. Samwise Gamgee followed close his heart, a fortress of love and resolve, his eyes sharp with fear for Frodo, his hand never far from his sword. Gollum had vanished, his betrayal a poison that lingered in the air, his absence a warning of the trap that awaited. Far to the west, Gandalf, the White Aragorn. Legolas and Gimli fought at Helm's Deep, their blades a defiance against Saruman's tide, while Merry and Pippin with the Ents brought ruin to Isengard, their small voices a spark that woke the earth's wrath. The fellowship, though scattered, was bound by a light unseen, a hope that burned in the face of despair's jaws. What does it mean to face a terror that is not merely death, but the annihilation of hope in the tales of Middle-earth, crafted by J.R.R. Tolkien's hand? The darkest trials are not those of steel or fire, but of the soul, where the light of faith must be kindled against a shadow that devours. Shelob's lair, a web of malice spun by Gollum's treachery, is no mere obstacle, but a crucible, a place where Frodo and Sam must confront not only the ring, but the fragility of their own hearts. The light Gandalf saw in Moria's depths, the unseen fire he trusted, burns still not in the stars, but in the will to endure, in the love that refuses to break, in the courage that dares to shine in the face of oblivion. Frodo's steps were faltering, each one a battle against the ring's weight and the tunnel's oppressive dark. The air was thick, choking, laced with a stench that was both decay and something older, something alive with hunger. The ring's voice was a scream now, a cacophony of fear and temptation that drowned his thoughts. "You are nothing," it said, "and I will consume you." Frodo's hand gripped the star-glass, its faint glow a memory of Lothlorien, of Galadriel's gaze, of Gandalf's faith in a fire that could not be quenched. Yet that faith was a thread stretched to breaking its strength, tested by the ring's relentless pull. Tolkien gives us Frodo not as a savior, but as a soul, one who carries the weight of the world, not because he is mighty, but because he must. The ring is no mere burden, but a predator feeding on doubt, luring with promises of release, demanding the heart's surrender. Sam saw the toll the tunnel took on Frodo, the way his face grew ashen, his eyes hollow, his breath a shallow gasp. He stayed close, his hand ready to steady his heart, fierce with a love that would not yield. "Hold on, Mr. Frodo," he said, his voice steady, though the darkness pressed like a weight on his chest. "We're not done yet." Sam's hand brushed Frodo's shoulder, a touch that was both anchor and prayer. And in that act, Tolkien offers us a truth. Love is not a shield against terror, but a light that burns in its face, a strength that sustains when hope is a fading ember. Sam's presence was not a promise of safety, but a vow, a flame that kindled Frodo's will, reminding him of the Shire of home, of the light that lingered beyond the shadow. The tunnel twisted its walls, closing in its darkness, a living thing that seemed to pulse with intent. Frodo felt a presence, not Gollum's sly shadow, but something vast, something ancient, something that hungered not for the ring alone, but for the light it sought to extinguish. Shelob, the great spider spawn of Ungoliant, lurked in the depths, her webs a trap woven by Gollum's betrayal, her malice a mirror of the ring's own hunger. Frodo's heart faltered, his hand tightening on the star-glass, its light flickering like a candle in a storm. "We should not have come," he whispered, his voice breaking his eyes, haunted by the weight of his choice. The ring answered its voice, a hiss. "You are mine, and there is no escape. Tolkien gives us Shelob not as a beast, but as a symbol, a manifestation of despair, a terror that feeds on the soul's fragility that seeks to devour the light within. Sam's eyes darted to the shadows, his hand on his sword, his heart pounding with a fear he would not name. "Something's here, Mr. Frodo," he said, his voice low, his love a shield against the dread that coiled around them. Frodo nodded, his heart torn between the urge to flee and the knowledge that there was no turning back. The star-glass glowed brighter, its light a sudden flare, and Frodo raised it, his voice trembling but resolute. "Alia," he said, the Elven word for aid, a prayer to the light of Eärendil, to the fire Gandalf served. The tunnel recoiled, the darkness shrinking from the star-glass's radiance, but Shelob was not so easily deterred. Her presence grew a weight that pressed upon the heart, a hunger that sought not just flesh but hope. The webs came first, thick and sticky, clinging to Frodo's hands, his cloak, his heart. He slashed with sting the elven blade, glowing blue, but the strands were relentless, each one a chain that bound him to despair. Sam fought at his side, his sword a flash of defiance, his voice a cry of love. "Stay with me, Mr. Frodo," he shouted, his heart fierce with a resolve that burned brighter than fear. Frodo stumbled, the ring's weight a stone that dragged him down, its voice loud in his mind. "You will fall and all will burn." Yet the star-glass held its light, a beacon, a reminder of Galadriel's words, of Gandalf's faith, of the unseen fire that burned in Moria's depths. Tolkien gives us this moment, not as a battle, but as a test, a choice to shine, though the shadow consumes, to trust in the light, though the jaws of despair close. Shelob struck her bulk a nightmare of shadow and malice, her eyes a cluster of cold stars, her sting a promise of oblivion. Frodo raised the star-glass, its light a sword that pierced the dark, and Shelob recoiled, her hunger thwarted by the radiance of Eärendil's star. But the ring's weight was too great, its voice too loud, and Frodo's strength failed. He fell, the star-glass slipping from his hand, the ring a chain that bound him to the dark. Shelob's sting found him, its venom a fire that burned through flesh and soul, and Frodo lay still, his breath gone, his light dimmed. Sam's cry was a wound, a scream that tore the silence, his heart breaking as he knelt beside his master. "No, Mr. Frodo," he whispered. His voice choked, his hands trembling as they touched Frodo's face. "You can't leave me." Tolkien gives us Sam not as a hero, but as a heart, one who carries not the ring, but the love that makes it bearable, the light that shines when all else fails. Sam took the star-glass, its glow a faint pulse in his hand, and stood between Frodo and Shelob. His sword raised his heart, a storm of grief and resolve. "Come on, you filth!" he shouted, his voice a defiance that echoed in the tunnel's depths. The star-glass flared, its light ablaze, and Sam struck his blade, finding Shelob's hide, his love, a fire that burned brighter than her malice. Shelob fled wounded, her hunger thwarted by a hobbit's courage, by a light she could not devour. Tolkien gives us this moment not as a triumph, but as a revelation. The smallest soul can shine the brightest. The weakest heart can carry the greatest light. Sam knelt beside Frodo, his tears falling, his heart refusing to believe the silence. "You're not gone," he said, his voice breaking, his hands clutching the star-glass, the ring, the hope that could not die. The ring's weight was his now, a burden he took not for power, but for love, for the promise he had made in the Shire, for the light Gandalf had seen. Sam lifted Frodo, his strength born of grief, and carried him from the tunnel, his steps slow, his heart a flame that would not fade. Tolkien gives us Sam's choice not as a duty, but as a sacrifice, a light that burns in the face of loss, a trust in the unseen fire that endures. Far to the west, at Helm's Deep Gandalf, the White led the dawn's charge, his staff a beacon, his voice a thunder that broke Saruman's army. Aragorn fought at the fore Andúril, a flash of light, his heart fierce with a resolve that burned brighter than fear. Legolas's arrows flew, his eyes sharp, his voice a song of defiance. Gimli's axe sang his heart alight with the pride of his kin. His friendship with Legolas, a light that endured. The light holds. Gandalf said, his eyes bright with the flame of Anor, and the dawn broke a symbol of the hope that endures, though the shadow seems to win. Tolkien gives us this battle not as a victory, but as a promise, a reminder that the light shines in the darkest hour, that those who fight may yet see the day. At Isengard, Merry and Pippin stood amid the wreckage, the Ents flood, a cleansing fire, Saruman's power broken by the wrath of the earth. "We did it, Pip," Merry said, his eyes bright, his heart fierce with a new purpose. Pippin nodded his guilt, a fading shadow, his hope, a flame that burned steady. "We're part of the story now," he said, his voice small but resolute. Tolkien gives us their triumph not as a side path, but as a light, a spark that wakes the world, a reminder that even the smallest choices can shift the tide. In Cirith Ungol, Sam carried Frodo to the tower's edge, his heart heavy with the ring's weight, his mind torn by the choice to go on. Orcs found them, mistaking Frodo for dead, and took him, their voices a cruel chorus that mocked Sam's hope. Sam followed the ring, a chain at his neck, the star glass a light in his hand, his heart fierce with a love that would not break. "I'm coming for you, Mr. Frodo," he whispered, his voice a vow, his steps a defiance of despair. Tolkien gives us Sam's resolve, not as a hero's boast, but as a truth. The light of love is the strongest force, the flame that burns when all else is lost, the hope that carries the world. The tower of Cirith Ungol loomed, its stones a mockery of hope, its shadow a weight that pressed upon Sam's heart. The ring's voice stirred its whispers, a temptation to wield it to save Frodo with its power. Yet Sam's heart was steady, his love a light that drowned the ring's lies. He climbed the star glass, glowing his sword ready, his heart alight with the memory of Gandalf's faith, of Galadriel's gift, of the unseen fire that burned in Moria's depths. Tolkien gives us this moment not as a climax, but as a question. What does it mean to carry the light when the world is dark, to trust, when hope is gone, to love, when all is lost? And so we climb with Sam through the tower, through the dawn, through the flood, where the heart is tested, where the light is sought. Frodo lies captive. Sam carries the ring. Gandalf and his companions fight the war. Merry and Pippin wake the world, each bearing their burdens, each seeking their truths. And we too will walk with them through the shadows toward the light, trusting in a hope we cannot see but know. For in the tales of Middle-earth, as in the tales of our own hearts, the jaws of despair are not the end, but the place where the light is kindled, where the journey continues eternal. The tower of Cirith Ungol loomed like a splinter of malice driven into the heart of the mountains, its stones black with the weight of despair, its shadow a shroud that choked the faint hope of dawn. The air was thick with the stench of orcs, and the echo of their cruel laughter, a sound that clawed at the soul. Samwise Gamgee climbed its twisted stair, the one ring a searing weight at his neck, its voice a venomous whisper that gnawed at his resolve, promising power, threatening ruin. The star glass of Galadriel glowed in his hand, a fragile light that pierced the gloom, a beacon of love that refused to dim. Frodo Baggins lay captive within his body, bound, his spirit bruised by Shelob's sting, his hope a fading ember in the ring's relentless shadow. Far to the west, Gandalf, the White Aragorn. Legolas and Gimli rode from Helm's Deep, their victory a spark in the gathering storm, while Merry and Pippin with the Ents stood amid Isengard's ruin, their small voices a flame that woke the earth. The fellowship, though scattered, was bound by a light unseen, a hope that burned in the face of despair's towering might. What does it mean to carry the light when the world is a prison, to trust in hope when the heart is broken? In the tales of Middle-earth crafted by J.R.R. Tolkien's hand, the darkest hours are not those of battle, but of solitude, where the soul must face its own fragility, where the light of faith must be kindled against a shadow that consumes. The tower of Cirith Ungol is no mere fortress, but a crucible, a place where Sam must confront not only the ring, but the weight of his love, the cost of his loyalty, the truth of his own heart. The light Gandalf saw in Moria's depths, The unseen fire he trusted burns still not in the stars, but in the will to climb, in the love that endures, in the courage that dares to shine in the face of despair. Sam's steps were heavy, each one a battle against the tower's oppressive weight and the ring's insidious pull. The stair was narrow, its stones slick with grime, its shadows thick with the presence of orcs. The ring's voice was a storm now, a torrent of temptation that battered his thoughts. "Take me," it said, "and save him. Wield me, and be free." Sam's hand strayed to the ring, its cold surface a lure, its promise of power, a lie that echoed in his heart. Yet the star-glass glowed its light, a memory of Lothlorien, of Galadriel's gaze, of Gandalf's faith in a fire that could not be quenched. Tolkien gives us Sam not as a hero, but as a heart, one who carries the ring, not for glory but for love, for the promise he made in the Shire, for the light that burns when all else fails. The ring was no mere burden, but a test, a mirror reflecting the heart's fears, its desires, its choice to endure or yield. The tower was a labyrinth, its passages twisting its air heavy with the stench of cruelty. Sam moved with care, his sword drawn, his heart pounding with a fear he would not name. He heard the orcs' voices, their words a mockery of hope, their laughter a blade that cut deep. "The prisoner's ours," one said, and Sam's heart lurched his love for Frodo, a fire that burned brighter than dread. He clutched the star-glass, its light a faint pulse, and pressed on his steps, a vow his heart, a storm of grief and resolve. Tolkien offers us Sam's climb, not as a quest, but as a pilgrimage, a journey through the soul's darkest valleys, where the light of love must be kindled against a shadow that devours. Frodo lay in the tower's highest chamber, his body bound by orcish cords, his mind clouded by Shelob's venom, his heart haunted by the ring's absence. He felt its loss like a wound, a void that left him exposed, vulnerable to the despair that had always lingered at the edges of his thoughts. "I have failed," he thought, his voice a whisper in the dark, his eyes fixed on the stone above. The orcs had taken the ring, or so he believed, and with it, the hope of the world. Yet, even in his despair, a faint memory stirred a light that flickered in the shadow. The star-glass Galadriel's gift, Gandalf's faith, Sam's love. Tolkien gives us Frodo, not as a savior, but as a soul, one who carries the weight of loss, not because he is strong, but because he must, whose hope is a fragile thread stretched to breaking, yet never fully snapped. Sam reached the chamber, his heart lurching as he saw Frodo, pale and still, a prisoner in a cage of stone and malice. The orcs were few, their numbers thinned by their own strife, and Sam moved like a shadow, his sword a flash of defiance, his love a fire that burned through fear. For Frodo he whispered, and the star-glass flared its light, a sword that pierced the dark. The orcs fell their cries, a fading echo, and Sam knelt beside Frodo, his hands trembling as they cut the cords, his voice breaking as he spoke. "I'm here, Mr. Frodo," he said, his eyes bright with tears, his heart fierce with a love that would not break. Frodo stirred his eyes, opening his voice a faint gasp. "Sam," he said, and in that word, Tolkien offers us a light not of triumph, but of reunion, of the bond that endures when all else is lost. The ring was Sam's burden now, its weight a chain that bound his heart, its voice a temptation to wield it to save Frodo with its power. "Give it back," Frodo said, his voice sharp with need, his eyes haunted by the ring's call. Sam hesitated, his heart torn between the urge to protect and the knowledge that the ring was Frodo's to bear. "It's heavy, Mr. Frodo," he said, his voice low, his hand steady as he returned it. Frodo took the ring, its weight a familiar wound, its voice loud in his mind. "You are mine, and there is no escape." Yet Sam's presence was louder, a light that drowned the ring's lies, a reminder of the Shire of home, of the hope that lingered beyond the shadow. Tolkien gives us this moment, not as a victory, but as a choice, a trust in the light that burns within, though the darkness grows. Far to the west, Gandalf, the White Road with Theoden's host, their victory at Helm's Deep, a spark in the gathering storm. Aragorn at their side bore Andúril its blade, a symbol of his heritage, but also a reminder of its failures. Isildur's shadow lingered, a whisper of temptation, of the ring's power, of the choice that had shaped the world. We ride to Gondor. Gandalf, said his voice steady, his eyes bright with the flame of Anor. The war is not won, but the light endures. Legolas and Gimli rode with him, their bond a light in the chaos. Legolas's eyes were sharp, his senses alive to the land's unrest. The shadow grows, he said, his voice a melody of warning. Gimli gripped his axe, his heart fierce with the memory of Moria. Let it come, he said, his voice gruff but resolute. Tolkien gives us their journey not as a march, but as a defiance, a light that burns against the shadow, a hope found in the trust they build. At Isengard, Merry and Pippin stood with the Ents. Saruman's power broken his stronghold, a ruin of stone and water. We've changed things, Pip, Merry said, his eyes bright, his heart fierce with a new purpose. Pippin nodded his guilt, a fading shadow, his hope a flame that burned steady. We're not just hobbits anymore, he said, his voice small but resolute. Treebeard's voice rumbled a song of the earth, his heart stirred by the hobbit's courage. The world turns, and the small may yet shape it, he said, his eyes deep with ancient wisdom. Tolkien gives us their triumph, not as a side path, but as a light, a spark that wakes the world, a reminder that even the smallest choices can shift the tide. In Cirith, Ungol, Frodo and Sam fled the tower. Their steps hurried, their hearts heavy with the ring's weight and the fear of pursuit. The orcs were in disarray, their numbers thinned by their own strife, but the shadow of Mordor was near its presence, a weight that pressed upon the soul. Frodo's strength was fading, his body weakened by Shelob's sting, his mind clouded by the ring's voice. I cannot go on, he said, his voice breaking his eyes on the barren slopes below. Sam knelt beside him, his hand on Frodo's shoulder, his heart fierce with love. You don't have to do it alone, Mr. Frodo, he said, his eyes bright with a truth he would not surrender. I'll carry you if I must. Tolkien gives us Sam's resolve not as a hero's boast, but as a truth. The light of love is the strongest force, the flame that burns when all else is lost, the hope that carries the world. The path led to the plains of Gorgoroth, a wasteland of ash and fire where the eye of Sauron loomed its gaze, a flame that sought them. Frodo felt its presence, a weight that crushed his heart, a voice that echoed the ring's, "You are seen, and you will fall." The star glass glowed a faint but steady light, a reminder of Galadriel's words, of Gandalf's faith, of the unseen fire that burned in Moria's depths. Sam stayed close, his hand never far from Frodo's, his heart a beacon that would not falter. "We're almost there, Mr. Frodo," he said, his voice steady, his eyes on the distant peak of Mount Doom. "Just a bit further." Tolkien gives us their journey, not as a quest, but as a sacrifice, a walk through the shadows of the soul, a search for the light that endures. In Gondor, Gandalf and Pippin arrived the city's white walls, a fragile shield against the shadow of Mordor. Pippin, small but resolute, stood before Denethor the steward, whose heart was clouded by grief and despair. "We fight for hope," Pippin said, his voice steady, his heart fierce with a purpose he had not known in the Shire. Gandalf's eyes were bright, his staff a beacon. "The light holds," he said, his voice a call to defiance. Tolkien gives us their stand not as a triumph, but as a promise, a reminder that the light shines in the darkest hour, that those who fight may yet see the day. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli rode with Theoden, their path leading to the paths of the dead, a trial that tested the heart's courage. Aragorn's hand rested on Andúril, his eyes steady, his heart stirred by the call of his heritage. "I am Isildur's heir," he said, his voice resolute, "and I will face the shadow." Legolas and Gimli stood with him, their bond a light that burned through fear. "We follow, Legolas," said his voice a melody of trust. To the end, Gimli added his axe ready, his heart fierce. Tolkien gives us their journey, not as a march, but as a defiance, a light that burns against the shadow, a hope found in the trust they build. Frodo and Sam pressed on the plains of Gorgoroth, a crucible of ash and fire, the ring's weight, a chain that bound their hearts. Frodo's steps were slow, his eyes haunted his strength, fading with every mile. Sam's hand was steady, his voice a song of the Shire, his love a light that would not fade. The eye was near its gaze, a fire that sought them, but the star-glass held its light, a spark that defied the dark. Tolkien gives us their climb, not as a climax, but as a question. What does it mean to carry the light when the world is ash to trust, when hope is gone to love, when all is lost? And so we walk with them through the tower, through the city, through the paths where the heart is tested, where the light is sought. Frodo and Sam will face the fire, Gandalf and Pippin, the siege, Aragorn and his companions, the dead, Merry, the battle, each bearing their burdens, each seeking their truths. And we too will walk with them through the shadows, toward the light, trusting in a hope we cannot see but know. For in the tales of Middle-earth, as in the tales of our own hearts, the prison of despair is not the end, but the place where the light is kindled, where the journey continues eternal. The plains of Gorgoroth were a wasteland of ash and flame, a scar upon the earth, where hope seemed to wither under the gaze of the eye of Sauron. The air was thick with sulphur, each breath a wound, each step a defiance of the shadow that pressed upon the soul. Frodo Baggins crawled toward Mount Doom, his body frail, his spirit frayed the One Ring, a molten weight at his chest, its voice a relentless fire that consumed his thoughts, promising power threatening oblivion. Samwise Gamgee, unyielding as the earth carried him, when he could no longer walk, his heart, a fortress of love that burned brighter than the volcano's glow. The star-glass of Galadriel tucked within Frodo's cloak was a faint spark, its light nearly lost in the haze of Mordor's malice. Far to the west, Gandalf the White and Pippin stood upon Gondor's walls, facing the tide of Mordor's armies, while Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli led the host of men to the Black Gate, their defiance a beacon to draw the eye. Merry with the Rohirrim rode to battle, his small heart fierce with purpose. The fellowship, though scattered, was bound by a light unseen, a hope that endured in the crucible of fire. What does it mean to stand at the edge of the abyss, to carry a burden that could save or doom the world? In the tales of Middle-earth, woven by J.R.R. Tolkien's hand, the final steps are not a march to glory, but a pilgrimage through the soul's deepest shadows, where the light of hope must be kindled against a darkness that devours. Mount Doom is no mere mountain, but a mirror reflecting the heart's fragility, its temptations, its capacity for sacrifice. Frodo and Sam, alone in the heart of Mordor, face a trial where the light Gandalf saw in Moria's depths must be sought not in the stars, but in the will to endure, in the love that carries, in the choice that shapes eternity. The ring's power is at its peak, but so is the hope that defies it, a flame that burns in the heart's quiet defiance. Frodo's body was a shadow of itself, his strength sapped by the ring's weight, his mind a battlefield where despair and temptation waged their war. The mountain loomed, its peak wreathed in fire, its slopes a gauntlet of ash and stone. The ring's voice was a roar, a cacophony that drowned his thoughts, its promises of power sharper than ever, its threats a blade that cut to the soul. "Claim me," it said, "and be free. Destroy me and lose everything." Frodo's hand clutched the ring, its surface burning, its call a siren's song that echoed in his heart. The star-glass, though faint, was a whisper of Lothlorien, of Galadriel's gaze, of Gandalf's faith in a fire unseen. Yet that faith was a thread stretched beyond breaking, its strength tested by the ring's relentless hunger. Tolkien gives us Frodo not as a savior, but as a soul, one who carries the weight of the world, not because he is mighty, but because he must, whose hope is a fragile ember in a storm of shadow. Sam saw the toll the mountain took on Frodo, the way his eyes grew vacant. His steps faltered. His breath became a gasp of pain. He carried him, his arms steady, his heart fierce with a love that would not yield. "I can't carry it for you, Mr. Frodo," he said, his voice breaking, his eyes bright with tears. "But I can carry you." Sam's strength was not in his body, but in his heart, a light that burned through the ash, a vow that held when all else crumbled. He shared the last of their water, a drop that tasted of dust, and in that act, Tolkien offers us a sacrament, the gift of care, the strength of love, the light that shines in the ordinary, the enduring, the true. Sam's presence was not a shield, but a flame, a spark that kindled Frodo's will, reminding him of the Shire of home, of the hope that lingered beyond the fire. The path to the Sammath, now the crack of doom, was a crucible, its heat a weight that pressed upon the soul, its glow a mockery of hope. Frodo crawled his hands, bleeding, his heart torn by the ring's voice, which now spoke with Sauron's own malice. "You are seen," it said, "and you will fall." The eye was everywhere, a flame that sought him, knew him, called him. Frodo's dreams were gone, replaced by visions of fire, of a world consumed, of a shire lost to shadow. "I am alone," he thought, and the words were a wound, a truth that cut deeper than the mountain's stone. Yet Sam was there, his hand steady, his voice, a song of the Shire tales, of gardens, of stars, of home. "We're almost there, Mr. Frodo," he said, his tone fierce, though his heart trembled. Frodo nodded, a faint echo of resolve, and in that moment Tolkien reminds us the darkest path is never solitary, for love walks beside us, a light that does not fade. Far to the west, at the Black Gate, Aragorn stood with the host of men, his banner raised, Andúril a flash of light in the gloom. He was no king yet, but a leader, his heart fierce with a purpose that burned brighter than fear. For Frodo, he said, his voice steady, his eyes on the gate's iron jaws. Legolas and Gimli stood at his side, their bond a light in the shadow. Legolas's arrows were ready, his eyes sharp, his voice a melody of defiance. "The light holds," he said, his heart stirred by the trust they shared. Gimli gripped his axe, his heart fierce with the memory of Moria. "Let them come," he said, his voice gruff but resolute. Gandalf, mounted on Shadowfax, was a beacon, his staff glowing, his eyes bright with the flame of Anor. "This is the hour," he said, his voice a thunder that defied the eye. Tolkien gives us their stand, not as a victory, but as a sacrifice, a light that draws the shadow's gaze, a hope that buys time for the ring-bearer's path. In Gondor, Pippin stood with Gandalf upon the walls of Minas Tirith, the city's white stones battered by Mordor's siege. The Nazgul's cries were a terror that clawed at the heart, but Pippin's spirit was fierce. His small hand on his sword, his eyes bright with a purpose he had not known in the Shire. "We fight for the world," he said, his voice steady, his heart stirred by the memory of Frodo, of Sam, of the light they carried. Gandalf's gaze was stern, but his heart was proud. "The dawn will come," he said, his voice a call to hope. Tolkien gives us their defense not as a triumph, but as a promise, a light that shines in the darkest hour, a defiance that holds though the shadow seems to win. Merry with the Rohirrim rode to Minas Tirith's aid, his heart fierce with a courage that burned through fear. Beside Éowyn, disguised as Dernhelm, he faced the Witch King, his small blade a spark in the chaos. For the Shire, he whispered, his voice small but resolute, and struck his blow a light that pierced the shadow. Éowyn's sword followed her cry, a defiance that broke the Nazgul's power. Tolkien gives us Merry's stand, not as a hero's boast, but as a truth. The smallest soul can shine the brightest, the weakest heart can strike the deepest blow, the light of courage can endure when all seems lost. In the Sammath. Now, Frodo stood at the edge of the crack of doom, the fire below a mirror of the ring's hunger, its heat a weight that crushed the soul. The ring was everything, its voice, Sauron's own, its power, a tide that swept away his will. "I have come," Frodo said, his voice hollow, his eyes fixed on the flames. "But I do not choose now to do what I came to do." He claimed the ring its power a rush that filled the void of his despair, its promise a lie that blinded him to the light. "The ring is mine," he said, and the words were a wound, a betrayal of the hope he had carried, a fall into the shadow he had fought. Tolkien gives us Frodo's choice, not as a failure, but as a truth. The heart is frail, the temptation overwhelming, the light fragile in the face of such power. Sam's cry was a wound, his heart breaking as he saw Frodo's fall. "No, Mr. Frodo," he whispered. His voice choked his hand, reaching for the star-glass, its light a faint pulse in the fire's glow. Yet the shadow was not done. Gollum, driven by the ring's call, emerged from the shadows, his eyes wild, his heart consumed by desire. He leapt his hands, clawing his voice, a scream of hunger and despair. Frodo fought, but the ring's power was his, now, its weight a chain that bound them both. Gollum's teeth found Frodo's finger, the ring torn free, and in that moment the mountain trembled. The fire roared, the eye turned. Gollum danced his joy a madness, his triumph a fleeting spark. "Precious," he cried, but the edge was near, and his step faltered. He fell the ring with him into the fire that birthed it, and the mountain shook its wrath, a cleansing flame that consumed the shadow's heart. Tolkien gives us Gollum's end not as a victory, but as a mercy, a light born of pity, a redemption unearned, but granted a reminder that even the fallen may serve the good. The ring was gone, its power broken, the eye extinguished in a storm of ash and fire. Frodo and Sam stumbled from the Sammath Naur, their bodies spent, their hearts heavy with the cost of their journey. The mountain erupted its rivers of fire, a tide that swept the plains, a judgment that spared no one. "It's done," Sam Frodo said, his voice faint, his eyes on the sky, where a faint star gleamed through the haze. Sam took his hand, his heart fierce with love, his voice a song of the Shire. "I'm glad you're with me," he said, his eyes bright with tears, his hope a flame that burned through the ash. They lay together, the star-glass glowing its light, a whisper of Galadriel's gift, of Gandalf's faith, of the unseen fire that had guided them. Tolkien gives us their end, not as a triumph, but as a revelation. The light endures not in the destruction of the shadow, but in the love that carries, in the hope that shines when all is lost. At the black gate the host of men faltered, the shadow's tide overwhelming, but the earth shook, the towers fell, and Gandalf's voice was a thunder of hope. "The ring is destroyed," he said, his eyes bright with the flame of Anor. Aragorn's heart stirred, his banner raised his voice, a call to victory. Legolas and Gimli fought on their bond, a light that burned through the chaos. In Gondor, Pippin stood with Gandalf, the city's walls holding the dawn, breaking a symbol of the hope that endures. Merry, wounded but alive, felt the tide turn his heart fierce with the knowledge that his blow had mattered. Tolkien gives us their victory, not as a climax, but as a promise. The light shines in the darkest hour, the smallest choices shape the world. The hope that endures is the greatest strength. The eagles came their wings, a song of salvation, bearing Gandalf to the mountain's slopes, where Frodo and Sam lay, their light fading but unbroken. "Well done, ring-bearer Gandalf," said, his voice soft, his eyes bright with a love that had never wavered. Frodo smiled, his heart light, his burden gone. Sam clung to him, his love a flame that would not fade. Tolkien gives us their rescue not as an end, but as a beginning, a light that lingers in the heart, a hope that carries beyond the fire. The world was changed, the shadow broken, but not without cost. Frodo and Sam returned to the Shire, its green hills a memory of the home they had fought for, yet a place they could no longer fully claim. Frodo's wounds were deep, his heart scarred by the ring's weight, his hope a light that flickered but did not fade. "I have been too deeply hurt, Sam," he said, his voice soft, his eyes on the sea. Sam nodded, his heart heavy, his love a vow that would endure. At the Grey Havens, Frodo passed into the west, his journey complete, his light entrusted to those he loved. Sam stood with Merry and Pippin, their hearts fierce with the memory of their friend, their hope a flame that burned steady. "Well, I'm back," Sam said, his voice small but resolute, his hand on the door of Bag End, his heart alight with the life he would build. Tolkien gives us their farewell not as a loss but as a revelation. The light is not in the staying but in the carrying, in the love that shapes the world, in the hope that endures beyond the sea. And so we stand with them at the edge of the fire, at the dawn of victory, at the shore of farewell, where the heart is tested, where the light is found. Frodo's journey ends. Sam's begins anew. Gandalf's faith is fulfilled. Aragorn's crown is claimed. Merry and Pippin's courage endures each a thread in the tapestry of Tolkien's myth. And we too walk with them through the shadows toward the light, trusting in a hope we cannot see but know. For in the tales of Middle-earth, as in the tales of our own hearts, the fire is not the end, but the place where the light is kindled, where the song fades into memory eternal.